The Hound, the Baskerville family's hound, is the main character of this tragic story. He was accused of having ties to the demons and sentenced to death. But at the last moment, when life was about to end, the witch vowed to return and take revenge. As if God himself had intervened in his fate, he opened his eyes and realized that he had returned to the past. Patriarch Hugo, head of the Baskerville family, had many descendants, but only one caught his attention: Vikir. The kid realized that he had regressed to the time when he was still a baby. In a past life, he lived as a hound, a faithful guardian of his family. Each hound of the Baskervilles is born with a single purpose: to strengthen the family and make it the strongest in the empire. The Vikir sought only one thing: recognition from the patriarch. But in the end, he was killed by Hugo himself. Now Vikir has a chance to change everything. Hugo ordered Vikir to be transferred to a special place, the Cradle of Swords. Every child in the Baskerville family must undergo a cruel test, reaching the river Styx. This magical body of water grants children unique powers, but its waters are too strong, and enduring them is a real feat. In a past life, Vikir was unable to receive the desired gift. This time he decided to use the power of Styx to the maximum. The Viker lasted in the waters for a full 7 minutes, far longer than anyone before him. He even took a sip of the magic water. Hugo, watching this, was pleased for the first time. His son turned out to be not just hardy, but greedy for life and power. The patriarch saw in him a true heir. Let's delve a little deeper into the protagonist's past life story. Hugo's illegitimate son. For 8 years, he'd been showing such talent that he was called a genius. By the age of 12, he was carrying out assassination and espionage missions, and by the age of 30, he was fighting monsters during the era of destruction. At 40 years old, the war between humans and demons finally ended. But it was then that he was betrayed and accused of treason. The reward for his loyalty was execution. Now everything is different. The Vicar not only withstood the river Styx, but also absorbed its power. However, danger awaited him immediately. A mysterious stranger placed 2 poisonous snakes by his bed. He dealt with them without even being scared. The Baskerville family seems ready to do anything to get rid of unnecessary heirs. 8 years passed, and Vikir studied at the estate with the other children of the family. His brothers didn't give him any peace. In a past life, he knew them well. Hugo's triplets who betrayed him then, stabbing him in the back. In 10 years, they will become his main enemy. The wizard decided this time he would put them in place earlier. The triplets were violent children. They wanted to see if Vikir really could survive 7 minutes underwater. The result was obvious: truth. But another unexpected result. One of the brothers was left without a finger. Vikir knew this was just the beginning. You have to play to the end. The triplets quickly realized that all the rumors about Vikir were true. He was the real little monster of the Baskerville family. The protagonist set them a condition: only one of them can leave unharmed. These words were a turning point that changed the course of their history. The triplets began to drift apart, each trying to save their own skin. But soon there was to be a practical examination for the young men at Baskerville Manor. Meanwhile, the patriarch was informed of a fight between the boys. The triplets were seriously injured. Although they were cured, the conflict with Vikir remained open. That's how the hero ended up in the patriarch's office. Hugo. Hugo wanted to know if his son understood what he had done wrong, because he beat his brothers who were a year older. The triplets received not only physical but also moral wounds. The witch answered simply, he was stronger. If he won, was it a mistake? In addition, the triplets had already come to the patriarch and, generously, forgave Vikir. But the boy himself did not feel any guilt. He was convinced. Forgiveness is the fate of the weak, incapable of revenge. Hugo was struck by these words. He realized that his son had learned the main principle of the Baskerville family. The patriarch ordered his butler to allow the child to take any item from the stash. Vikir was overjoyed. He only wanted to take the chocolate. In farewell, Hugo ordered his son to do his best on the exam, so that he doesn't lose to the direct heirs of the family. The Witcher hated the man who killed him in his past life even more. As for the reward, the guy ultimately chose not chocolate, but pure bloody beans. But he didn't take them for food. He needs this strange delicacy for an exam that will take place in 5 days. It was then that something terrible would happen, a catastrophe the likes of which the Baskerville family had never known. In this world, the Baskerville family is known as the Berserker family. Children here go through brutal training from their childhood. They barely take their first steps when they have to climb the mountains. This hellish training ends when they turn 8 years old. Then comes the crucial moment, the The survival exam. On the day of the exam, all the young hounds gather near the Red and Black Mountains. They are given a simple task: to survive here for a whole month. They must hunt huge and strong monsters. Going outside the examination zone is not welcome, as the Red and Black Mountains are almost unexplored and teeming with unknown horrors. The vicar was only glad of this. He hadn't been to these places in a long time and almost missed them. As soon as the bell rang, signaling the start, the hounds scattered in different directions. Killing each other is not forbidden, but points are deducted for it. So everyone is trying to be careful. A group of shadow dogs, specially trained warriors who are tasked with keeping deadly clashes to a minimum, keeps order in the area. One of the shadow dogs was following Vikir. But I wondered, why was he heading to the Forbidden Zone? The protagonist found a cozy place and, instead of immediately entering the battle, decided to rest. While other young hounds fought for their lives, he built himself a shelter and set up his own life. The shadow dog watched, amazed. Is this guy, who's already considered a genius, just hiding in the woods? In the end, he decided there was no point in following the boy any further. The Vicar finally sighed with relief, left alone. The first stage of its preparation was completed. Now it's time for the real hunt. A few days later, he found himself in the heart of the restricted area. When Vikir was a scout, he roamed these places freely. The air here had a sharp smell of burning. This meant he was moving in the right direction. Hellhound lived. It was a sentinel monster that consumed the fire of hell itself. In the past, Vikir could barely overcome such an 18-year-old. And even now, victory seemed only illusory. However, he had one proven method, and I'm sure you're curious to know how this little guy thought. The monster's first weakness was obvious. It only moved in a straight line. This meant that it was difficult for him to change direction abruptly. The second weakness was strange. Even a small amount of water frightened him. And the final weakness, common to all dog monsters, was that they always opened their mouths when they ran. And it was this moment that Vikir took full advantage of. He was able to throw the poison straight into the beast's throat. And it wasn't just poison, it was chocolate, which all dogs were afraid of to death. And the bloody beans from which this chocolate is made are an obvious end for any monster. This is how Vikir destroyed the first monster in the exam. Vikir did not forget to absorb the creature's experience to become stronger. He was already planning to take the head of the hellhound, when suddenly he was surrounded by a whole pack of dogs from hell itself. But something happened that scared these monsters. And this was what our hero was afraid of. Cerberus stood before him. This monster had a very high level of danger and lived on another ridge. But Vikir noticed the wounds on his body. It seems that the barbarian tribes living around wanted to kill this monster. The vizier realized that this was his chance. He had long hidden his true power at home with the Baskerville family. Vikir has already mastered the third technique of the family, and we will look at it in more detail soon. But in short, other hounds reached this level only after 18 years. So Vikir was definitely a genius who held his own no worse than a real Cerberus. But here, one extra second of thought cost him his life. If this had happened to anyone else, there would already be a corpse. Will Vikir be able to win? We will find out later. The vicar later regained consciousness, but the situation was critical. The hand was seriously injured, and Cerberus didn't even think about stopping. However, our protagonist quickly found a way out of this situation. He rushed to run, trying to get to the prepared shelter. If the monster catches him before, then it will be the end. The wizard finally reached the base, and it was there that Cerberus came across prepared traps. The spears in the pits, smeared with the essence of blood beans, became the main blow. Since Cerberus was of the dog breed, the poison took effect instantly. But even while dying, he was not a simple monster. He was a high-ranking demon. Still, a precise blow with a poisoned spear decided the outcome. Vikir felt energy begin to emanate from the monster's body. But before dealing with the carcass, there was one more important task to complete. Cerberus was a gatekeeper who protected his territory, and this meant that the dungeon with the treasures must be nearby. Since the guard was killed, the dungeon is now accessible. Following the monster, using his special skills, Vikir got to the right place. But what treasures are hidden inside the dungeon? The tunnel was illuminated by ruby veins, and this phenomenon was both mesmerizing and surprising. However, much scarier was the bright light at the end of the tunnel. So Vikir got to the main room of the dungeon. Looking around, one thing was clear. Someone had already been here, but it had been a long time ago. An old note lay next to the skeleton. The story it contained was quite interesting, so I'll tell it to you. This letter was written to warn future generations and prevent them from repeating the same mistakes. The stone cave was considered only a legend, but two brothers accidentally stumbled upon it and together began to conquer it. After killing many monsters, they reached the main test of this place. This is where they were stuck for 3 whole years. The wizard understood that the final test awaited him in this very room. Under the ruby light, one could read the rules. When you enter, you are 1. When you are inside, you are 2. And when you leave, you are 1 again. The brothers reread this text repeatedly, but in the end, they came to a terrible conclusion. Only one of them can leave the dungeon with the treasure. They fought, and one of the brothers died. But even after that, nothing changed. And the one who survived decided to leave this place. The vicar clearly understood that they had simply misunderstood the text of the task. Because there is no dungeon that cannot be passed. The hero quickly understood the meaning of the riddle. He is alone as he walks through the dark passage. But light creates shadow, and if it goes out, the final test will unfold. The wizard turned out to be right. The reason for the brothers' death was that they did not understand the essence of this place, and the very relic of the Devil's Cave became their downfall. There was also a message on the wall that only the bloody Baskerville could possess Beelzebub. The wizard immediately understood what had just happened. The legend of the Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub. This is one of the devils known as the 7 Woes, which existed in ancient legends. To stop these monsters, the heads of 7 families united in the fight against each devil. The demon that the first patriarch of the Baskervilles fought was Beelzebub, and now Vikir stood before this ancient relic. The incredible sword changed shape and seeped into the protagonist's body, and now they have become one. However, the mystery was what power this demonic sword concealed. Suddenly, a feeling of wild hunger gripped Visa. The sword demanded a true sacrifice. This led him to the body of the previously killed hound. To his surprise, the weapon had 3 ability slots. It seemed to be the innate power of the sword. After all, the Lord of the Flies absorbed the abilities of his enemies. By absorbing Cerberus's power, Visa gained 2 new abilities: the bleeding of the Hellhound and the burning of Cerberus. After that, he could finally rest until the end of the ordeal. When all the young hounds returned home, it was time for evaluation. One of the hunted monsters caused general astonishment. Even the patriarch could not hide his emotions. He personally summoned Vikir to find out how he had managed to defeat such a terrifying creature. The truth he heard shocked both him and the butler. However, the main question remained, why didn't Vikir report on his exam? The answer was simple. He did not consider the butler his master. These words became a real balm for the soul for Hugo, the patriarch. He allowed Vikir to make any wish he wanted. The boy asked for access to the library, one of the largest in the empire. Surprisingly, Hugo not only agreed, but also told them where to find books with their clan's techniques. However, the Vicar had another goal in mind. A special book written by the first patriarch of the Baskervilles. Hugo had not yet realized its true value. And very soon this secret will be in the hands of the Vikir. Let me tell you about the Baskerville sword art. Its essence lies in a special technique of drawing clicks, where each movement symbolizes a separate skill. And it varies from simple to the most complex level. Each technique is unique and used in different situations. However, Vikira was not interested in the 6th technique from the book he had access to. His true goal is a book called Ambush, hidden among the shelves of a giant library. This book contained the basics of the first technique, but due to torn-out pages, it was long forgotten. Vikir knew that it was not really just a textbook. In a past life, he and his squad found a torn page from this very book. Then Hugo understood its value and found the book itself. The Ambush. She was hiding the Baskerville family secret, a top 10 technique, which drove the patriarch crazy. It was through her that he sent hounds to search for the lost pages in all 7 families. In his past life, Hugo reached the 9th technique thanks to the efforts of his subordinates. But this time it's different. The vicar himself collected these pages, so he remembered every word. He only read the book for half a day, but he remembered and understood all of its content. Although the 10th technique is still a long way off. The wizard has reached a new level. He has finally drawn a 5th tooth. Joy overwhelmed him, almost bringing him to tears. The wizard was pleased. He had reached a level he had only reached at the age of 30 in his past life. Now an 8-year-old boy has matched the Baskerville masters. But he wasn't going to stop. In this life, he will definitely master the 10th technique. However, it's not worth showing Hugo your true strength. All you need to do is pique the patriarch's interest. That evening, Vikir went to his father, telling him about his feelings from the 6th technique. He subtly hinted that he might have sensed mana, and this meant that he was able to master at least the first technique of the family. To prove this, Visa had to fight a hungry, ruthless monster. Everyone was stunned by the spectacle. but he was only glad for the opportunity. The Viker easily began to chop the orc into pieces. The orc, known for his regeneration, couldn't even recover. The reason is that the Hellhound's bleeding skill didn't even give it a chance. But Vikir decided to impress his father even more. His blade flashed with aura, and he finished off the monster. The Patriarch's gaze at that moment was worth everything. However, Vikir did not stop there. He asked for another, even stronger monster. The young men whispered among themselves, considering Vikir crazy. But he knew that he had to show his strength at the right moment. If he is lucky and his progress is recognized, he will be able to separate from the Patriarch. Hugo decided to give his son a chance. They just had a special monster in store for experiments. A true troll from the Red and Black Mountains, a dangerous B-rank creature. Vikir immediately rushed to attack, but quickly realized that with this monster's regeneration, simple blows would not be enough. A clear strategy was needed. Using the first technique, he was able to leave a deep cut. Hugo ordered him to stop, but Visir exclaimed that he was on the verge of an epiphany. Everything was going according to his plan. He decided how much force he would show. This is the first time in the history of the Baskerville clan that someone has achieved the second technique at such a young age. The Patriarch was amazed. Vikir's life began to change even faster. Even the triplets decided to get closer to him. But a serious conversation with Hugo awaited him ahead. Shortly before this, important guests had arrived at Baskerville Manor, members of the Morg clan. Adolf, a representative of the Wizard clan, arrived at Hugo, the owner of the sword. The relationship between them has always been tense. The Emperor himself once said that magic and the sword are two sides of the same coin. Therefore, joint training was introduced to strengthen the bonds between the families of the Empire. But this time, a serious problem arose. Ruby mines on the border of two clans. Surprisingly, the conversation between the leaders began with a discussion of children. Adolf learned about the young genius from the Baskerville family. But the Wizard clan also had something to show off. His niece Camus entered the room. The girl immediately greeted him aggressively, accusing Hugo of taking their mine. She didn't stop, pouring out accusations one after another. Moreover, the Patriarch could barely contain himself. Vikir's voice was heard. He immediately noticed the envy of the Morg family. And Camus, of course, could not ignore this. Memories flooded the boy. He remembered her from a past life. Then Camus, the genius of the Morg clan, destroyed all the monsters in the Red and Black Mountains, and her incredible beauty captivated everyone. But that will only be in the distant future. So far, there was only a stubborn little girl standing before him. The Witcher angered her even more with his proposals regarding the ruby mines. Camus, trying to prove her point, created an ice sculpture depicting the territories of the two clans. The children were captivated by this lively debate, and somehow it so happened that a dagger ended up in the hands of Vikir. The vizier was just about to touch Camus' hand with his dagger, when Adolf suddenly appeared before him. But it turned out that the weapon was just a soft toy, an innocent joke. This situation gave Hugo an idea on how to solve the ruby problem. Meanwhile, joint training began. Children aged 8 to 15 participated in it. But all eyes were fixed on one battle, a duel between the geniuses of two families. Camus was not going to hold back and immediately began preparing a powerful spell. But Vikir wasn't going to give in to some girl either. He easily broke through the wall that Camus had created. But he gave her a light poke on the forehead with his finger. The brilliant sorceress fell, but the battle did not end there. The Viker climbed the stone wall again and gave it a second blow. It looks like he was on horseback again. The hero decided to change the situation a little. The Viker threw himself straight into the fire that was flying between the other pair of duelists. Camus, without hesitation, rushed after him. The entire arena was enveloped in thick smoke. Camus managed to avoid injury thanks to protective charms, but the fire mercilessly destroyed her clothes. Once the smoke clears, she will be a laughing stock for everyone. Out of shame, she could only pray for a miracle. Suddenly, someone's jacket was on her shoulders. The vicar, without hesitation, covered her. Kaus froze in amazement. Why this fool decided to help her? The smoke gradually cleared, and both heads of families finally calmed down. The audience couldn't take their eyes off Vikir, amazed by his body and stamina. Even Camus couldn't help but look away from her unexpected savior. The Patriarch was pleased with his son. The little hero understood the essence of these battles with wizards. Besides, Hugo was clearly worried about Visir, although he didn't show it. Ahead of them lay a farewell meeting with the Morg clan. Adolf made an unexpected proposal. He offered the Baskerville family a deal. Payment for the ruby mines in the form of engagement. He wanted his niece to marry the eldest son of a swordsman family. But here a small problem arose. Hugo's eldest descendant was already 25 years old. The age difference with Camus was huge. Camus firmly stated that she would not marry anyone weaker than her mother. This was her condition, and she was not going to back down. What's more, she wanted to see someone her own age next to her, and her gaze at that moment was fixed on Vikir. The Baskerville patriarch remarked that the main thing in an engagement is the intentions of the newlyweds and asked his son what he thought about it. To everyone's surprise, Vikir accepted the offer. Well, it seems that our hero's adventures are just beginning. Camus was stunned by Vikir's words. Adolf was curiously evaluating a potential groom for his niece. Despite his calm appearance, he was not just a wizard. He is a 6th-degree master, one of the strongest in the clan. However, Adolf decided to talk to Vikir alone. He wanted to personally check whether the boy was worthy of becoming Camus' husband. The conditions were simple. A pot of water stood on the wizard's head. If Vikir can make even a drop spill, victory is his. The protagonist understood that his real goal was not to prove anything to Adolf, and to live up to Hugo's expectations. The Vicar instantly rushed to the attack, but Adolf turned out to be far from a simple opponent. He was surrounded by a powerful magical barrier. However, all these tricks did not scare Vikir. He had a goal, and he wouldn't back down. The protagonist struck the shield with his sword with all his strength. His weapon could not withstand it and shattered into pieces. Adolf only shook his head, saying that the boy, although talented, was too weak to protect Camus. But these words meant nothing anymore. Water was running down the wizard's face. The vicar smugly said that the goal had been achieved. Camus did not hide her emotions. Her gaze spoke louder than words. Will the patriarch of Baskerville really be able to raise a hound stronger than anyone could have imagined? I hope you remember our hero well. 7 whole years passed. The boys became young men. Their bodies gained incredible strength. Among all of them, the Hugo triplets stood out in particular. Their aura became a rich crimson color, which suited the Baskerville family perfectly. But even against their background, Vikir looked like a real monster. He had already completed his studies at the Baskerville court, and the decision about his future fate had been made. The vicar had not seen the patriarch for a long time. He had aged noticeably, and new scars covered his face. Hugo personally met the legendary archer from a barbarian tribe, the one who left a scar on her face but was never able to catch. However, Vikira was only concerned about his own fate. He was once sent to the Order of the Pitbulls. He spent 21 months fighting for his life in the Red and Black Mountains. The Baskerville children were divided into elite and expendable material at the age of 15, and a son from a side branch would never have made it to the elite. Hugo wouldn't have allowed that. But a miracle happened. The patriarch decided to send Vikir to the lower house of parliament. His achievements have surpassed all others, and now he will become the deputy consul in the city of Underdog. The vicar agreed, but reminded him of something important. He claimed his reward for defeating Adolf Morg 7 years ago. He needed one very valuable thing. What exactly? We will find out very soon. Hugo was pleased with his son. He believed in his success and prepared a great future for him. But the butler revealed another important truth to Visir. Hugo truly valued his son. But all this is just a stepping stone to the real goal. The Witcher will finally get a chance for revenge. Underdog is a large, bustling city ruled by the Baskerville clan. As soon as he arrived there, Vikir decided to celebrate with a grand party. The celebration was in full swing. The scale was simply incredible. But the city's general secretary, Chiahua Baskerville, was not thrilled. He thought they had sent some loser again. Besides, all his predecessors had been burned by bribes and had fled in disgrace, so his mood was still the same. Chiahua was already seething with anger when Vikir suddenly appeared right behind him. He calmly introduced himself and, smiling slightly, noted that Chiahua had no middle name. In the Baskerville family, this meant only one thing. He was not from the main branch of the family. Because of this, Chiahua was an outcast his whole life. But this only amused Vikir. He already knew that Chiahua was a local and knew the city like the back of his hand. Besides, the hero wasn't going to stop him from working. Vikir has already understood the root of Underdog's problem: illegal business. He decided, if he removes all the bosses of the Shadow World, the city will come to life. The Vikir respected the laws of Underdog, but decided to add one new one to them. Chiahua was stunned. He certainly hadn't expected such a turn of events from the young consul. Yet, that is how their strange but productive partnership began. The next day, Vikir gathered all the inhabitants of the city. His goal was simple: to destroy the underworld economy as quickly as possible. People looked at him with distrust. The young consul? What could he do? And then Vikir did something unexpected. He drove a stick into the ground and declared, "Whoever pulls it out will receive 1,000,000 gold pieces." The townspeople froze in shock. No one even dared to try. The vicar raised the stake to 100 million gold. People booed, shouting that this was some kind of bad joke. But even that didn't help. No one broke the silence. Then he raised the stakes to 1,000,000,000 gold pieces, a sum only the elite of the Baskervilles could afford. The crowd froze. Even Chiahua looked alarmed. And suddenly a little girl came forward. She trembled, afraid that she might simply be killed for such audacity. But Vikir calmly asked her to try. To everyone's shock, she pulled the stick out of the ground. The wizard, smiling, got down on one knee and handed her a bag containing 100 million gold, promising that the rest would be taken home with security. He firmly stated, laws must be obeyed. The city exploded with shock and delight. People understood that it is profitable to obey the law, but dangerous to break it. Lawlessness in Underdog has declined sharply. Chiahua, who had long since lost faith in the city, was shocked. In 20 years, nothing had touched his soul so much. The vizier thought about this plan for a long time and found a simple solution. Chiahua, deeply moved, promised to be faithful to young Baskerville. But that was just the beginning. Now it was necessary to somehow return a huge amount of money to the city budget. Vikir decided to monitor illegal groups to squeeze their dirty money out of them. His instinct for criminals was impeccable, and something interesting awaited ahead. A young self-governing association which included descendants of 7 local Baskerville families. She abruptly invited Vikir to a meeting. But for our hero, it was the perfect opportunity to get rid of the parasites that were sucking the life out of the city. The Burning Suspension Club is located in the luxurious Underdog Hotel. In the farthest corner was a room where 6 hours of rest cost a fortune. 7 members of the youth association, local mages, were hanging out there. They felt untouchable, hiding under the roof of influential families. The hound of the Baskervilles, considering them stupid butchers who only see the sword in front of them. After the incident in Dunaro, they were sure that the clan had not understood anything and had simply swallowed the premise. Dunaro, one of the most loyal families to the Baskervilles, was exterminated to the last by order of the patriarch. But we will return to this story later. The rich, meanwhile, decided to put on a show to lure the new consul Vikir into the club, humiliate him, and make him pay for their entire feast. They thought he would get scared and stop meddling in their affairs. But they miscalculated greatly. Vikir appeared in the elite hall with the girls, stunning everyone. He calmly introduced himself, and the crowd immediately recognized him. But Vikir had completely different plans. He wasn't going to have fun. The protagonist walked up to the champagne tower and, without blinking, knocked it to the floor. The hall fell silent. The wizard looked at these elite fools and said that they would still pay for everything, and not just in gold. Their idle chatter did not interest him. He reminded them, the Baskerville hounds never doubt their master, but their heads have long been clouded by money and power. That's why he came. The young consul is going to teach these parasites a lesson, once and for all. Everything, of course, ended in Vikir's favor. The rich parasites were thrown into prison, even though they never stopped shouting about their connections, money and power. Even Chiahua was shocked to see how beaten they had become. But he didn't know yet that this was just the beginning. These golden youth turned out to be more than just a bunch of mages, a hidden organization that openly defied the Baskervilles' authority. Vikir could see it in their brazen, self-assured faces. But as soon as the sun sets over the horizon, there will be execution. As soon as they realized it wasn't a joke, all their arrogance disappeared. They began to beg for their lives, promising to give everything they had. But it is forbidden to kill without evidence. And Vikir had his own methods for this evidence to appear. A prison guard came to the cell with a special item. On Vikir's orders, he brought tools for interrogation. The hero was going to turn these rats into a source of truth, no matter how much they begged. Rumors about the 7 rich men spread through the city like wildfire. People whispered that this was just a simple power struggle between the old and new elites. The families of the criminals even sent an official apology to the consul. The townspeople were sure that soon the rich would be released and Vikir would be made a puppet. But no one expected how it would end. 7 severed heads were displayed in the main square. The city froze. The vicar was satisfied. Justice had been done. But this was only the first step. The next step is to destroy criminal groups. And to get to the main bosses, the city will pass through the bloodbath. Chiahua agreed to help. Vis's new plan, something even bolder needs to be done. Sell the protagonist himself as a slave. On the outskirts of Underdog, near the huge circus tent, luxurious carriages were already lined up. This evening, a secret slave auction was being held here. And, of course, no one in the Baskerville family even suspected this. Among the goods were kidnapped barbarians, nobles, and common people. It was here that Vikir went, and Chiahua, disguised as a salesman, played his role. His special lot looked quite impressive. Long black hair and blazing red eyes, a rare exotic find. The auction began, and its scale was impressive. The host solemnly opened the auction by presenting the first lot, an A-rank monster. This creature had 19 hearts and was worth 250 million gold. Next, they showed a barbarian from the Balak tribe, a wild, unruly slave, ideal for training. However, the audience grimaced. They were clearly not impressed by the product. The barbarian girl resisted and screamed, but she was quickly subdued and dragged away. An elite auction should only have worthy lots. The next lot was Vikir. The host excitedly announced that this was the main star of the evening, and he was not mistaken. The stakes soared until they reached 6 billion gold. The buyer turned out to be an influential baron, the new master of the criminal world whose wealth has skyrocketed. But the baron did not plan to keep the goods for long. He was going to resell the boy at an auction in the capital to make an even bigger profit. When Vikira was brought to his new master, then the baron assured them with a smile that a lot of fun was waiting for them. However, the young hero has already put his plan into action. In an instant, he broke the shackles. One single blow, and all that remained of the baron was a soulless, bloody carcass. The vicar tore off his wig, raised his head, and defiantly greeted all the auction guests. He made it clear that none of them would get out of here alive. Surprisingly, no one was even scared by Vikir's words. The host quickly took control of the situation and ordered the security to attack. It seemed to them that in front of them was only a young politician without weapons, and moreover, in the role of a slave. But it didn't really matter. Bezelwool appeared in Visir's hand, as if summoned by his will, and the battle erupted with renewed vigor. His blows were so fast and powerful that his opponents didn't even have time to realize what was happening. A bright red aura around the hero blazed, as if death itself had entered the arena. It became clear to everyone that they were faced with not just a warrior, but a true swordsman. While Vikir was destroying his enemies, Chiahua was exposed. The auctioneer grabbed him and pressed the dagger to his throat. It seemed like the plan had fallen apart. Chiahua shouted at Vikir not to stop, but he only smiled. He wasn't going to leave his friend in trouble, because everything was already prepared. The young consul pulled out his whistle and blew sharply. A deafening sound swept through, causing everyone to cover their ears. But nothing happened. The host already laughed triumphantly, thinking that now the situation was under his complete control. Suddenly, a sword pierced his throat. An entire army of stern, hardened warriors burst into the hall. Their appearance left no room for doubt. They were the pit bulls of the Baskerville family, the most brutal knightly order of the empire, known for its ruthlessness in purges. On Vikir's face, everything was going exactly according to plan. The assistant of the baron who bought Visir understood everything immediately. She turned pale because she knew, if the pit bulls came, no one would get out of here alive. But suddenly, Vikir ordered to leave her alive. All others, tear to pieces. What happened next is best left undescribed in words. Screams, blood, and death filled the auction room, turning it into a veritable slaughterhouse. Approached Vikir, the head of the Pitbull Order and also his uncle. He patted his nephew on the shoulder and said that if he needed help, all he had to do was whistle. He even suggested that the boy join the order. But Vikir had more important things to do. He went to the warehouse where all the slaves and monsters were kept. Among them, he found her, the same barbarian who had fought desperately at the beginning of the auction. The poor barbarian was barely alive. She had clearly been tortured and abused, leaving almost nothing of her former strength. But she was luckier than the others. Vikir found her. He gave her the healing potion without hesitation, and an almost miracle happened. The girl suddenly came to her senses. The protagonist knew a little bit of the barbarian language, so he quickly told her to run away. The girl shouted something incomprehensible, but obediently ran into the darkness. And Vikir was already thinking about something else. It was time for the main trophy of the evening. His goal was clear, the corpse of a monster with 19 hearts. The Wesselvool, as if sensing future food, buzzed in the hero's hand. It seemed that the sword was hungry and yearned for a worthy sacrifice. The rumors didn't take long to spread. The city was buzzing. The city remains the charred ruins of the same elite club that served as a den of underdog parasites. The owners of this establishment were exposed dead for public display, as a warning to anyone who thought they could hide from the new order. The situation escalated to the point that the heads of the 7 largest clans literally begged for mercy. But Vikir was not going to grant them freedom. In his hands was evidence of the crimes of their descendants. And according to the laws of the Baskerville family, that meant only one thing. 3 generations of traitors were not destined to see the dawn. But despite all this bloody carnage, the city began to prosper. Crime declined, and the young consul's fame only grew. Chiahua has also changed. Now he has become a loyal ally of Vikir. The Secretary General firmly believed that with such a leader, Underdog could only flourish. But Vikir wasn't finished. Another important meeting awaited him, with the same Cindy, the blonde whose life he spared. Of course, he didn't leave her for no reason. The young consul knew that Baron Gambino had risen so quickly thanks to this girl. The investigation confirmed his suspicions. Cindy had a unique gift. She knew how to make money even in the worst conditions. The vicar gave her a choice: answer all his questions and be free. And if not, well, there weren't many options here, and the girl understood that perfectly well. He was interested in one thing. What was her impression of him as a politician? Cindy honestly replied that he was doing quite well. But Vikir wanted to hear the truth hidden behind polite words. As soon as their eyes met, Cindy was gripped by fear. The vicar looked at her coldly, demanding an answer. What exactly was he doing wrong? The girl realized that it was useless to drag her feet. She had to speak. She explained that good deeds are, of course, wonderful, but laws against crime alone are not enough. Eventually, they will begin to harm ordinary people. And when that happens, all the anger will fall on the consul. Besides, Baskerville would not be forgiven if he became more influential than their representative in Underdog. The solution? Cindy suggested a simple but risky plan: return power and glory to the clan leader and disappear from sight. Going, for example, to the Imperial Academy is far away and imperceptible. And when the time comes, the Baskerville chief will be a convenient scapegoat. The proposal sounded like a dog biting its own master. The girl insisted that this was the only way for the hound to avoid the patriarch's wrath. The vicar listened attentively. He liked her logic. It matched his own thoughts. He always kept his promises, so Cindy was free. But before that, he had one more question. What did she know about the Dunaro clan? This family of merchants was once famous until an accident wiped them off the face of the earth. Dunaro's youngest son decided to show off his sword. The Baskervilles were shocked. The boy was showing off their secret technique. This reached the patriarch, and he released the hunting dogs. Dunaro clan disappeared forever. But they weren't behind all this. 7 young parasites from large clans stole the equipment and trained the unfortunate boy to frame the family. Cindy didn't understand why Visir was telling this ancient story. The answer was simple. On that night of bloody massacre, one little girl survived. She was spared because of her beauty, but this became an even worse sentence. She went through inhuman torture. The new consul brought this story to light and made the 7 parasites get what they deserved. They confessed to all the crimes before their death. Cindy, her eyes full of tears, shouted, "Who are they asking for forgiveness from?" The witch answered quietly. The same girl who is now hiding under the false name of Cindy, the only survivor of the Dunaro clan. She couldn't believe it, but when she saw the bodies and the bloody words of forgiveness written right on the walls of the cells, everything became clear. However, this was not enough. The vicar gave her one last order: to hate the Baskervilles with all her heart. Cindy swore that from now on, she would do everything she could to ensure that Vicky Van Baskerville would never need money or information. It seems our young hero has gained another loyal ally. The events surrounding Vikir did not subside for a moment. The Baskerville family's butler unexpectedly arrived at Underdog. His appearance was not for nothing. The patriarch praised Vikir's progress and ordered him to return to the main residence. Upon returning, Vikir immediately set out to meet his father. Thanks to his efforts, the Baskerville family lost their reputation as soulless warriors who see only the sword in front of them. The strangest thing was that my father's face looked happy. But the surprises didn't end there. Vikria, he was to go to the Imperial Academy Coliseum, where all the elite were gathered. It was a chance to become stronger without attracting too much attention. In addition, his father gave him the right to choose who would go with him. Without hesitation, he took the triplets, perfect live targets for training. Meanwhile, Hugo remembered Vikir's plan for the ruby mines. which he had come up with when he was 8 years old. It turned out that everything worked. The Morgue family suggested a joint raid, and Visa was to check out the area before entering the academy. Officially, the protagonist left Underdog, leaving all matters to Chihuahua. Together with the Order of Pitbulls, he set off for the Borderlands, where the ruby mines are located, which the Baskervilles gave to the Morgue family. Formally, it was an inspection. In reality, it's an excuse to get rid of the barbarians. Baskerville squads waited on the other side of the mountains, ready to intervene if anything happened. Hugo jokingly said that it was also a great opportunity to see how barbarians live. However, Vikir was not greeted very warmly. At the entrance to the fortress, he was stopped by 3 girls. Those triplets again! They seemed familiar to him. In their past lives, they were called the 3 flowers of the Morgue family. Each of them was crazy in their own way, and together they turned into a real natural disaster. The vizier was not going to wait and ordered them to be let through immediately. The triplets' reaction was predictable. They decided to attack the uninvited guests. But the most interesting thing happened next. Baskerville triplets entered the battle. Hugo's triplets actually wanted to thank their brother for the chance to enter the academy. In the future, these boys will become deadly soldiers, faithfully carrying out the orders of the Vikir. If he trains them well, they will become perfect fighters. The girls from the fortress were already at the peak of their anger and were about ready to rush into battle. Vikir remembered that the Morgue triplets had previously been famous as magicians, each of whom possessed a separate elemental attribute. Their attacks, combined together, became many times more powerful. And now the young Baskervilles will have to face this devastating combination. The boys rushed forward, using the family's techniques against the powerful spells of the Morgue triplets. Pitbull Squad just watched the fight with amusement. After all, such a fight was worth watching. The old question, which is stronger, the sword or magic, has resurfaced. Watching the battle, the commander noticed that it was important to study the potential of the clan's young talents. Which will determine the future of the Empire is quite an interesting task. The protagonist noted that he also belongs to this chosen generation. However, the commander insisted that the young master had long outgrown this level. For Vikir, this whole fight was a waste of time. He needed to get to the fortress as quickly as possible. But suddenly, the battle ended. A fiery explosion knocked all the triplets off their feet. On the walls of the fortress stood a sorceress of incredible beauty, seemingly unaware of what was happening here. Camus. She immediately recognized Visir and approached him. It had been 7 years since they last met, and now she looked even more beautiful. But Vikir paid no attention to this. He only said that he needed to go inside. Camus was stunned. Is that all he could say after so many years? Vikir didn't understand why she reacted like that. He didn't feel he owed her anything. Camus, with tears in her eyes, exclaimed that such an attitude was unacceptable for a future wife. Everyone froze. Absolutely everyone. And most of all, Vikir himself. After an emotional exchange, Vikir and Camus went for a walk. Camus didn't understand why he had brought 3 young idiots with him, future hounds. But Vikir insisted that the main forces remained behind the mountain range, and she knew it perfectly well. The girl kept asking strange questions. Now she suddenly wanted to know which barbarian tribes were the most intolerant. The vicar answered without hesitation. Balix and Rococo. Camus just chuckled and gave him an 8 out of 100 for cleverness. And then she added that she doesn't like smart guys at all. A man, she says, is much more interesting when he's a little stupid. She continued her rating and gave him a score of 99 for his perfect face. The vicar just rolled his eyes and asked them to stop this senseless game. But Camus was adamant. As a future wife, she had to be strict. It was here that Vikir realized his fatal mistake. He had completely forgotten about the engagement. It's all because of that incident 7 years ago when they were still children. He asked Camus to just forget about it and pretend nothing happened. The girl got angry. She said that you can't turn back time and threw a rag at him. The vicar immediately understood. It was his jacket. Camus blushed all over, but didn't have time to say anything because their walk was interrupted. The search party captured the barbarian scout. The wizard recognized him immediately. He was from the Rococo tribe of magicians. The barbarian was silent, and no spells could untie his tongue. Camus could not accept this. A few days ago, barbarians attacked the fortress and kidnapped the daughter of the Morgue family, Rose. None of those present understood the barbarian's language. However, Vikir spoke to the creature, and she responded aggressively, but with some sinister pleasure. The vicar calmly announced, "Rose is dead." Camus was seething with rage. She meted out the punishment without hesitation. The barbarian died on the spot. And then the girl suddenly broke down. Despite her strength, she was still a child who didn't know how to handle such pain. And then she understood the barbarian's words. She asked Visa in a whisper if she had heard correctly that these monsters had eaten poor Rose. This made Camus even worse. The vicar didn't try to calm her down. He had no right to do so. Camus' power was truly impressive. She resolutely declared that she would take revenge on the barbarians, and Vikir had no doubt. This was the reaction of a true heroine. But again, the moment of intimacy between them was unceremoniously interrupted. A loud bell rang from the fortress. The enemies were attacking. The barbarians were already rushing at the walls, their arrows filling the sky. The mountain dwellers were not only strong warriors, but also skilled archers. Vikir felt that perhaps he had arrived here a little too early. There was no time to think when two barbarians suddenly threw ropes around his neck. Their voices sounded in a foreign language, but the meaning was clear without translation. They were successfully hunting men. Only Vikir was not going to become their prey. With a light movement, he got rid of the two girls. The protagonist remembered that Hugo had ordered not to engage in battle until the main forces arrived. But is it worth waiting at all? Thinking, Vikir mechanically deflected the arrows until he heard Camus' voice behind him. She didn't understand why he didn't kill them. The daughter of the Morgue family wanted all these barbaric scum to perish. But at the same time, she was impressed by the level of skill that the Baskerville heir had achieved. But if Vikir acted on the Patriarch's orders, then she would have to do it herself. Her thirst for revenge for her cousin was too strong. But suddenly, a thin needle hit her in the neck. The barbarians used a paralyzing poison. The situation was becoming dangerous. The vizier understood that he needed to proceed cautiously and perhaps even retreat. Camus shouted that she had no right to stop, that revenge was above all else. Vikir insisted that she should think rationally, but at that moment, something flashed past his head with incredible force. The arrow. Its destructive power was so overwhelming that he froze for a second. And at that moment, Camus disappeared. The barbarians captured her. The wizard looked sharply in her direction and realized who was standing opposite him. Girl with an arrow, the same one he freed at the slave auction. The vicar was stunned. Was he really rewarded for his rescue with betrayal? She briefly explained that the Morgue family had no relation to him. If he wants to get the beauty back, he will have to go after them. Vikir was already wondering whether he should use his full potential when a powerful magical wave swept behind him. Adolphe Morgue. The magician was mad with rage. His magic literally tore the ground apart, preventing the barbarians from escaping. But they still slipped away, heading towards the forbidden territory near the Red and Black Mountains. Adolphe, overcome with despair, understood that he could do nothing to save his niece. But suddenly, Vikir himself called. This was not his first dangerous trip. The Morgue didn't even think of restraining him. On the contrary, his only hope was this brilliant and fearless Baskerville. The dense forest of the Red and Black Mountains was located in the Baskerville territory. This place was teeming with monsters and other horrible creatures. An ordinary person wouldn't last even an hour there. It's not for nothing that it's called the forest that consumes life. But Visa didn't care. He felt at home here. Adolphe and a pack of pit bulls followed him, and the Baskerville triplets, fascinated by his skill, could not look away. Soon they approached the barbarian camp. In order not to expose himself, Adolphe Morgue cast a spell of silence. He will definitely never forget his nephew's help. Meanwhile, Camus, furious, shouted that she would kill all the barbarians. But no one listened to her. One of the barbarians clearly had his eye on her. He didn't understand the words, but he guessed that she wasn't going to obey. However, Ian, the same girl whom Vikir had once helped, ordered that her prey not be touched. The barbarians began to argue, but Ian quickly proved who was in charge. The man backed away, which seemed strange. People like him didn't give up trophies. Ian had just spoken to Camus when a loud explosion rang out from behind. The camp was attacked. Camus immediately understood. It was her uncle who had come. Meanwhile, wizards and swordsmen mercilessly dealt with the barbarians. Everything was going smoothly, but Vikira couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. Why did the Balik warriors, who usually methodically set up ambushes, now look so nervous? The barbarians muttered among themselves that these people were real madmen. Making such a commotion in the middle of the night, in the heart of the forest? It's sheer madness. But Adolphe was adamant. He ordered not to leave a single barbarian alive and to pursue them to the end. Meanwhile, Vikir released Camus, and it was at this moment that Ian appeared before them. She was waiting for him. She knew he would return. The barbarian carefully examined Vikir and then mysteriously said that he had passed. Passed what? Of course, the wizard didn't understand anything. but a dangerous spark ran between the girls. It seems that both had their own plans for our hero. Vikir could not remember any barbarian like Ayen in his past life. However, one thing worried him. Was it really she who left the scar on Hugo's face? Although she was too young to be the legendary archer of the Balak tribe, the Night Fox. Suddenly, a poisoned needle flew in their direction again. Vikir's patience was reaching its limit. First, he would take Camus to her uncle, and only then would he deal with everything else. But Ayan had completely different plans. She wanted her savior to go with her voluntarily. It seems these two won't escape so easily. Ayan decided to act radically to get rid of Camus. The arrow she shot flew straight to the target. But at the last moment, Adolf created an ice wall, saving his niece. True, there was no time to rejoice. Almost immediately, the rope wrapped around Vikir's neck. Ayan shouted that he better not resist. They had almost no time left. But what's the rush? The feeling of anxiety thickened, like the darkness around. Ayan was visibly nervous. They had been noticed. Vesselvul was activated on Vikir's hand. The barbarian shouted that Madame Octopus was approaching, and almost immediately, a terrible sound broke the silence of the night. A tall pillar rose straight up to the sky. The witch couldn't believe her eyes. He knew this monster. Madame Octopus, S-level danger. The creature before them was so terrifying that they couldn't even scream. It was too risky. Panic? Leica? All of that will have to be postponed until later. Madame Octopus had poor eyesight. Her hearing and senses were many times sharper than those of any human. Even before Vikir's return, a wise man told of terrible events in the Red and Black Mountains. The legend was more like a horror story about an 8-legged monster living in the depths of the forest. There were even references to this creature in old imperial records. This monster is capable of wiping out an entire country in one day. The situation was escalating. The spider's venom was already spreading around, forcing Ayan to quicken his pace. They had to flee immediately. However, it was impossible to simply run away from this creature. It could literally sense everything. The Balak tribe, breaking into small groups, began to retreat. But the Morg and Baskerville clans, they ran together, and that was what became fatal. Madame chose her victim. The wizards tried desperately to restrain the giant spider, but it was all in vain. Her paws pierced her victims like skewers through meat. Even Adolf Morg, shocked by what he saw, did not think about fighting. He only fled. The vizier understood. Either he acts or no one will survive. He couldn't let this creature reach Baskerville land. We need to tie her legs, give others at least some chance. And the only person capable of doing this was himself. The decision was made. Adolf gave him permission to act and ordered the rest to retreat. Of course, Vikira would be perfectly happy with the destruction of the Baskerville clan's territory. Hugo's sight. This was his chance to buy time to hone the power stored in his memory. And when he becomes strong enough to cover his tracks, he will return. But now if he doesn't give it his all, he'll just die. The witch possessed incredible strength, but his main asset is his spirit. Only he allowed him to confront the horror that loomed over them. His blow, it's hard to describe what it was like. Pure, destructive power that devoured everything around. A red glow filled the entire forest. And Camus, she barely managed to shed a tear. Is this the end? No, it wasn't the end yet. Vikir woke up in a completely unfamiliar place. One thing was clear to him. He had survived the battle with Madame. If the spider hadn't frozen, as if rooted to the spot at the crucial moment, his life could have ended right there. But even so, he suffered serious damage from a direct collision with the monster. However, if everything goes as it is now, then we can say that the plan is working. Most importantly, he was able to hide from Hugo's all-seeing eye. Moreover, fate threw him into the village of Balakiv. However, there was one question. Why hasn't he been executed yet? The answer didn't take long to come. The same man who had been shooting poisoned darts approached Vikir. With a satisfied smile, he hinted that the hero should be grateful for the opportunity to breathe. Because if it weren't for his status as the commander's dog, he would have been boiled alive a long time ago. The vicar looked at him and his heart clenched with anger. These words about the dog reminded him of the patriarch himself. The boy's eyes filled with dark fury, and his body tensed with the desire to kill. But before he could do anything, he received a strong blow. The barbarian only scornfully said that he should find his master, who should be on the other end of the rope. The vicar gritted his teeth and remembered this boy, and he would definitely take revenge on him. He soon found the owner of the rope. A beautiful barbarian archer sat in a small lake, calmly immersed in the water. Her rude order to lie down came as a surprise to him. But the explanation was not long in coming. An arrow flew into his head. The barbarian kids were training and almost killed the main character. Ayan wasn't even surprised. She just thanked Visir for saving her at the slave auction. According to barbaric customs, a favor must be returned double, so she saved him twice. If she hadn't returned after the fight with Madame, everything could have ended differently. But Vikir didn't understand. Why was his life spared at all? Ayan was well aware of his high position in society, and frankly, she was interested in how much she could get for it. But she definitely wasn't going to return him to civilization. From now on, Vikir will belong to her, and we will call her Mistress. However, before he can deal with that, there is one more thing to do. Greet the chief of this tribe. The matriarch was already waiting for them. The tent belonging to the matriarch was impressive in its scale. Ayan's mother lived there. The mistress was clearly pleased that the reason for all her daughter's thoughts had appeared in her village. The wizard understood everything immediately. Before him stood the Night Fox, the legendary female warrior of the Balak tribe who had once left a scar on Hugo's nose. She was the reason why, in a past life, Vikir could not pass the Red and Black Mountains. And if a fight broke out between them now, his chances of winning were zero. The matriarch also sensed something familiar in the boy's face. It was simple. This barbarian instinctively recognized Hugo's blood. But so far, she has not expressed her suspicions, and Ayan, meanwhile, already had plans for her slave. Once he gets treatment, he will be extremely useful. The vizier looked around the inside of the tent while the women discussed something. However, his trials were just beginning. The first task of the new owner is to build a home for herself. Like a true slave, he couldn't argue, so he had to obey. Ayan wanted to see if this imperial handsome man was really as stupid as he seemed. Besides, she was going to use him to establish a hierarchy. But the protagonist easily coped with the task. He didn't just build a house. Everything was done perfectly, thought out down to the smallest detail. Moreover, Vikir even drew attention to the problem with the matriarch's tent. He clearly explained the situation to Ayan, and she ordered him to look into the matter. So the hero took on the grueling process of making bricks, and all his efforts were not in vain. The matriarch was stunned. It seems her daughter has chosen a worthy husband. However, Vikir had his own plans. He longed to become a part of this forest life. And soon, he had a chance to prove that he was worthy of freedom. The village has recently had a problem with large prey. If Vikir can hunt something really big, he will cease to be a slave and become an ordinary citizen. This sweet arrangement did not remain a secret. Ahun was watching everything closely. Every people had its own faith, and the Balak tribe was no exception. Before each hunt, the shaman performed a ceremony for the warriors. The barbarians felt guilty for killing innocent victims, so they painted their faces with charcoal to hide from the god of death. But Vikir quickly realized that all these rituals were nothing more than a shaman's way of maintaining his status. Even in such a remote tribe, everything worked according to the same principles as in the Empire. After the ceremony, Vikiru was given the necessary spiked combat collar. This is a mandatory defense so that the victim does not bite out the hunter's throat. He felt that he was gradually beginning to adapt to his new life, and this even pleased him. But as always, something was bound to go wrong. Akun started a fight again, trying to brag that he was the one who caught the biggest prey. However, what interested him most was the collar around Vikir's neck. The barbarian clearly couldn't believe that the commander was really going to take the wounded man hunting. According to him, he will only be a burden. But before making such statements, it's worth watching your own waistline. The vicar boldly hinted that one must hold on to one's weapon as tightly as one's lifelong love. Otherwise, it is easy to lose it. Akun became angry, ready to pounce on him, but he had no right to command someone else's property. So Ayan decided to teach Vikir a lesson herself. He got it pretty bad, so we won't describe his wounds. One thing is clear. Ayan made it clear who is in charge here. However, after that, she started to worry. Suddenly, she had overdone it, and now he was angry? But it was unpleasant for Visir to even say that the girl quickly noticed. Ayan didn't hesitate. As soon as she heard about the pain, she immediately rushed to him. The vicar didn't have time to say anything when her lips touched his face. There was an awkward pause. It seems that barbarians had a habit of licking each other's wounds. And then, Ayan unexpectedly promised to do everything in her power for him. The vicar was surprised, but such an opportunity was definitely not to be wasted. Ayan noticed that he was thinking too long. But in the end, Vikir asked for only one thing, to teach him how to shoot a bow. The training began almost immediately. The Balaks were true masters of archery and taught no worse than they shot themselves. But Vikir's lesson was unexpectedly interrupted. Bakira, The wolf that Ian rode sniffed out something important. Thanks to this discovery, they could move much faster. A mountain river connected to the ocean, and many animals lived near it. Fish that followed the rapid current often crashed against sharp rocks, becoming easy prey for the bull bear. The individual that Vikir and Iron were spying on wasn't just big. This was a bull bear with a perfect pedigree that had passed countless tests. But they weren't going to hunt him. Their target is the male, whom the female bull bear has been waiting for. She had to choose the weakest partner in order to completely dominate him. After all, a strong male could simply kill her. The Baloks had the same principle. The most popular choice was always a young man with perfect genes. All that remained was to wait until the female finally suppressed the male's power. The process was delayed. It had been 4 days since Vikir and Ayan had been tracking the monsters. And all this time, the protagonist watched in amazement as the bull bears mated like crazy. Ayan just smiled, hinting that everything happens the same way in her tribe. She even suggested that the inhabitants of the empire were incapable of such a thing. She wondered if it was Vikir who could have done this. The rather intimate conversation was interrupted by the bear herself. The process was complete, and now the female chased the male away, because after all, he had become nothing more than a competitor for food and territory. The tired male wanted to find a remote place to rest. That's when predators could go hunting. So they followed the bull bear all the way to the icy mountains. The cold pierced Visir to the bone. Iron immediately warned. If he froze completely, he would only become a burden on the hunt. He had no choice but to squeeze as close to his companion as possible. But the next moment surprised them both. The monster's tracks suddenly stopped. This monster hid in a cave and waited for them. Will a bear attack be fatal? Visir's quick reaction, Iron would have definitely been torn to pieces. Bakira was the first to attack. It looks like it was a bull bear that lured them into a trap. Now it was clear why the male had so interested the female. He was clearly stronger than he seemed. And now our heroes will have to face this monster head-on. Ayen wanted to show that she was the true mistress of the situation. She ordered Vikiru to simply remain in ambush and not interfere. Hunting was her business, not a slave's. The Baloks' attitude towards their servants was rather unusual. But even more impressive was their mastery of the bow. Even if the victim hid behind rocks, it didn't matter to Iron. The arrow of a true archer will pierce even steel. As soon as the tip disappeared from sight, it immediately pierced the ice and struck the monster. Vikir realized his mistress wasn't just a good shot. She used her mana no less skillfully than her weapons. If you were to judge her skills, she could surpass even Camus Morgue. But the bull bear wasn't going to die that easily. Enraged, he continued to attack, despite numerous wounds. However, an arrow filled with Ayen's determination could even pierce the walls of a castle, let alone a monster. But at the last moment, the bear swerved sharply and lunged straight at the archer. Ayen didn't have time to react. The beast knocked her off the wolf. The night fox always said that animals sense the killing intent coming from a person. And that's exactly what Ayen is about. Forgot at the most important moment. Will it all end so simply? No. Vikir appeared right in front of the monster's face. Don't forget about the main character. It was his time to demonstrate his strength. Cerberus's flames burst from his sword and burned the poor bull bear with one blow. This power of Vikir was simply too powerful. But his weakened body is not yet ready to withstand it. The Baloks had another rather interesting tradition. The hunter who caught the largest prey received the respect and recognition of the tribe. That's how Vikir became the hero of the hunt. But there was also an unpleasant side to this. The one who received the most honors was entitled to the smallest share of meat. However, Vikir was not too concerned. After all, in this hunt he had obtained something much more valuable. Hazelwool absorbed the 600 kilogram stamina of a bull bear, and his sword absorbed the monster's life force, thanks to which Vikir's body was significantly restored. And now for something funnier. Ayen placed another portion of meat in front of him and insisted that he eat the strange thing on the plate. The Baloks believed that it was worth eating the part of the monster's body that the hunter himself had problems with. The wizard couldn't understand what it was. Was it really a gut? But the reactions of the other warriors told him otherwise. They shouted at Ayen that her prayers were too obvious. Whatever the case, Vikir still ate his portion. Ayen was delighted. Now, in her opinion, he could fulfill his duty. But let's return to the everyday lives of the barbarians. After a successful hunt, the tribe would make a sacrifice, giving a significant portion of the prey to Madame Octopus. They asked her for permission to live in this forest. Vikir had long observed how the tribe treated Madame, and increasingly realized how foolish his action had been. But the Balak's traditions did not end there. A long line formed at the entrance to the matriarch's tent. It turned out that Night Fox Aquila had gathered the elders for an important meeting. As the tribe's honored hunter, Vikir could now ask the matriarch for anything he wanted. And Iron already had a great idea for him. All that remained was to voice the request. Aquila was pleased with the actions of the young hero. This brilliant archer, majestic like Hugo, yet warm and gentle in her strength, decided to change Visa's status. From now on, he became a full member of the Balak family. And now he could ask for one thing. While performing the task of Iron, Vikir requested ablution at the hero's spring. Vikir's request sounded too bold. The shaman was furious. Some slave who had recently joined them dared to ask for such a thing. The hero's spring was a sacred place of the Balaks, accessible only to the most distinguished warriors. This wasn't just a hot spring. It healed both external and internal wounds. Aquila might have agreed, but there was simply no reason for such a gift. The discussion was interrupted by the ringing of a bell. Guests had arrived in the village. The Night Fox postponed the question for later, and the shaman continued to glare at Vikir. The merchants arrived. The vicar immediately recognized the bourgeois family. How did they end up here? None of the great families, neither the Baskervilles nor the Morgs, would let them pass through their lands. It turns out they used the smugglers' routes. The hero watched without interfering. It's unlikely anyone is interested in hearing about market manipulation, but here's what he saw. Merchants brought common goods from the Empire food, necessities, and exchanged them for rare resources. They cynically took advantage of the fact that the barbarians did not know the true value of things. Vikir could have exposed this scam, but he risked being recognized. Patience ran out when a little girl from the tribe wanted to buy a glass sphere to have sweet dreams. In exchange, she brought a rare and nutritious sun beetle. The merchant only grimaced in disgust and knocked the creature out of her hands. And then, speaking in Imperial, he said that the girl was quite pretty and would be a good fit for being sold into slavery. This deal didn't happen. The vicar intervened. But it wasn't just this horror. He revealed the whole scheme. The merchants fooled the Balaks, taking advantage of their gullibility. The protagonist knew perfectly well how much the goods actually cost. But that's not all. The so-called dream sphere turned out to be an ordinary ball with holes, filled with drugs. Banned throughout the Empire, Ayan understood everything, and rage overwhelmed her. The arrow, filled with anger, found the merchant's shoulder. Those bastards ran away, but they weren't pursued, because Ayan knew that if you hurt one animal from the pack, it would definitely return to its own. And so it happened. The traders got to the smugglers. But they cannot escape retribution. One thing awaited them: complete destruction. The mercenaries, along with the merchants, set out in search of the Balaks. But in vain. The barbarians saw their enemies before they had time to suspect anything. Only the faint light from the cigarette betrayed their presence. Ayan ordered her fighters to shoot only in the head. Meanwhile, Vikir was preparing his strategic move. Barrels were hung over the heads of the mercenaries, and for a reason. As soon as the arrows with fire hit them, the oil inside exploded. The Balaks fought mercilessly, but one merchant stood aside. It was he who was tracked down by Vikir. The man, panicking, began to shout that he could not be killed. He held up a piece of paper with the official seal of Consul Underdog, a permit to trade. Moreover, he assured that this document was signed by Vikir himself. The protagonist was stunned because he definitely did not give such permission. The witness to his true identity did not live long. The Vikir quickly killed him and fled with Ayan. The mercenaries didn't understand why the Balaks were suddenly retreating and decided to pursue them to cut them to pieces. But it was not destined. She woke up. Madame Octopus appeared as Vikir had expected. Moreover, his fiery tactics worked perfectly. Now he was officially recognized as a great warrior of the Balak tribe. Aquila, without hesitation, allowed him to wash in the hero's spring. Shaman Akiman didn't even glance in his direction. However, Vikir was haunted by the merchant's words. He claimed that their exchange had been blessed by the shaman himself. It was clear that something was wrong here. But he decided to deal with it later. First rest. The water of the source purified mana and healed internal wounds. This place is hard to compare to the river Styx, but at least there were no age restrictions here. In addition, Ayan also decided to swim with her former slave. The girl didn't even think about whether this might reduce the effectiveness of the ablution. She was worried about something else. She was going to make Vikira with your own. The conversation between them did not subside, until Vikir suddenly asked how Ayan would prefer to be called, by name or simply slave. He was irritated by her uncertainty. Ayan moved closer, clearly intending to explain everything. She didn't want to call him either a slave or a Vikia, but her answer never came. A flock of small barbarians flew into the source. By order of the matriarch, they were allowed to bathe here, as their bodies were weakened by imperial drugs. Arkun thanked Vikiru for helping his sister, and even apologized for all the previous conflicts. It seems that the protagonist has finally been accepted as a full member of the tribe. And then 2 years flew by. You didn't even have time to blink an eye. Now Visir is 17. During this time, he honed his skills to perfection. He could easily release all 6 Baskerville claws, although the 10th technique was still a long way off. Reaching 6th place at 17 is simply an incredible result. His 6th magic circle spoke for itself. Here is a swordmaster. But time was ticking away. He realized how long he had been in the forest. But one thing remained the same. He and Ayan still hunted together. However, Vikir noticed that something was bothering her. Ayan showed a dagger that had been lost by one of the Imperials who had recently entered the forest. The emblem on the weapon was familiar, the sign of the Leviathan clan. This family had the same importance in the Empire as the Baskervilles. A stranger who invaded the forest spilled a red liquid into various bodies of water, then disappeared. One of these thieves was caught, but he swallowed poison and died, leaving behind only this dagger. But something else was bothering Ayan. She could not stand lies and secrets. Therefore, she confessed that another inhabitant of the Empire had entered the forest. And Vikir was definitely his target because it was the same girl. For 2 years, this girl repeatedly came to the forest with search teams. She was clearly trying to find traces of Visir. Ayan was worried about whether he would go with her if they met. She was afraid that she would be hated for hiding such important information. But Vikir immediately gave a clear answer. He would not return. It was true. Ayan could not hide her joy. Vikir realized that he was dead to the Empire. However, he planned to return only when he learned to perfectly hide his power. But this girl, is she really Camus Morgue? Has she really not forgotten that rescue? Or is this just part of the diplomatic game? The wizard decided that he needed to find out what was happening outside the forest. Suddenly, a giant water monster jumped out of the water. This fish was a harbinger of the rainy season, and its size indicated that this time it would be long. But something was wrong. There was an arrow sticking out of her belly. After opening the fish, they found a human skeleton inside. Ayan immediately realized that this was a member of the Rococo tribe. This seemed strange. The monster was a stupid creature and fed only on carrion. Then what if this person was still alive when he devoured her? Something clearly happened in other tribes. Without wasting any time, Vikir and Ayan set out for the Rococo tribe. The picture that greeted them was horrific. Warriors lay everywhere with signs of vomiting, diarrhea, and red spots on their skin. The scariest thing was that there wasn't even smoke coming from the village. Absolutely dead territory. No sounds, no signs of life. The corpses and red stains reminded Visira of the epidemic that had once devastated the barbarians. In a past life, she was called the Red Death. This infection spread with incredible speed, destroying almost everyone who was not immune. Vikir quickly reassured Ayan, assuring him that the disease was not easily transmitted so they could continue their investigation. Then suddenly, Ayan screamed loudly. A little girl stood nearby. By the looks of it, she was about 5 years old. She was crying over someone's body. But she was not of the Rococo tribe. Who is she? The girl herself answered this question. She said that she was a slave. Her name was Pomeranian. It was strange. Such a name was found only in the Empire. But the next words struck Visir more than anything else. She called herself Pomeranian Le Baskerville. It's time for you to learn a little more about the Baskerville clan. Van is the name for members of the collateral line. Lee is for men of the main line. But La is a name for women from the main line, and it is not found so often. Just such a representative stood before Vikir. La, the Baskerville symbol on it. When Visir opened the locket, he saw that it was a photograph of Hugo. Le Baskerville with 2 women. Vikir could not contain his emotions and aggressively asked, "Who are these people?" Ayan intervened, noting that with that expression on his face, he definitely wouldn't get an answer. Vikir, unable to hide his shock, realized that the girl had done nothing wrong. He calmed down, asked with a smile, and the Pomeranian relaxed a little. She explained that the photo shows her mother, grandparents, and grandparents. The vicar immediately realized that Butler Barrymore had not lied. Then, in fact, he could not believe that the patriarch was such a wonderful family man. From his first wife, Roxane, he had an only daughter, Penelope, who was kidnapped by barbarians. The patriarch desperately searched for his daughter and even moved closer to the Red and Black Mountains. But even after that, he could not find her and mourned his wife's death from illness. The vicar then considered it impossible. But now he had living proof of this story before him. Hugo's own granddaughter, and it was becoming more and more real. Now, when the patriarch, after so many years of fighting the barbarians, meets his granddaughter, born of barbarians, it would be interesting to see his face. The vicar, without hesitation, invited the little girl to go with him. The Pomeranian said her mom always told her to follow the person with red eyes. And this was the very moment when the paths of the two martyrs of the Sword Clan crossed. The lives of Vityr and Pomeranian began to change rapidly. Vityr felt all the hardships of fatherhood. It was obvious to him that he could not raise a Pomeranian in a village of Balax. They need a place where they will be away from Hugo's eyes, but not too far from civilization. He already understood that he would have to turn to Chiahua with a big request. But before that, he had to meet the matriarch. Aquila learned that an infectious disease was spreading through the forest. This was bad news because besides, the rainy season would begin very soon. The Witcher remembered the Red Death from his past life. This disease spread so quickly that it reached the borders of the Empire. The Empire was able to survive it thanks to the wall of fire created by Camus Morgue, and Saint Dolores of the Quo Vadis family used divine power to heal the sick. These methods only worked within the Empire, while most of the barbarians died out. And this greatly strengthened the position of the Baskerville family. But the ecosystem of the forest was disrupted. Monsters were approaching the very borders. The Baskervilles were able to successfully defend themselves, and Hugo strengthened his position. This time, Vityr was sure that this would not happen again, because he knew how to stop the Red Death. After the news of the Red Death, the most interesting things began. The Vizier proved one simple but important truth to the barbarians. If you immerse a living creature in contaminated water, its body will gradually become covered in spots. But if you boil the water first, there will be no problems. Even the matriarch was pleased that the protagonist generously shared useful knowledge. Thanks to him, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. However, it was too early to relax. The disease entered the body through the eyes, mucous membranes, and was transmitted through the respiratory tract. The morning fog was especially dangerous, and with the rainy season approaching, the situation could become even worse. Therefore, there was only one solution left: to move the settlement. The shaman immediately objected, stating that they could not leave the lands of their ancestors. But Vityr had a plan that allowed him to remain in this territory. The rainy season this time turned out to be particularly cruel. The rivers overflowed their banks, flooding almost the entire forest. In the Red and Black Mountains, the water swallowed everything except one place: the village of the Balax. These skilled craftsmen moved their homes high into the trees, so even the heaviest rains could not reach them. And all this was made possible thanks to Vityr. But suddenly, eyes lit up from the depths of the water. A moment later, a giant water monster emerged to the surface. Iron didn't hesitate, immediately firing an arrow at the monster and growling for the damn catfish to get away. Interestingly, this fish has been considered the king of forest waters for decades. The barbarians called her Ka, and now this monster, waving its mighty tail, destroyed one of the buildings on which the Balakas were working. The vicar did not wait. His sixth Baskerville technique pierced the air and almost caught the fish, but she managed to hide under the water. Despite this, everyone was satisfied. Vityr had driven Ka away from their village. That same evening, he prepared a delicious dinner, once again showing concern for his niece. Only one thing bothered him. Where did Ayan come from in their house? Her portion of food was not planned, but she was already calmly eating dinner, as if that was how it should be. Pomeranian, watching them closely, noted that the two were behaving like a married couple. Ayan just smiled, clearly not against such a comparison, and Vityr just looked on in surprise at how these two had managed to become so close. However, their peaceful evening was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Ahun. He again needed the help of Vityr, who had already saved people from the village more than once. But this time it was serious. Ahun begged the protagonist to save his little sister. The girl's illness began last evening. Ahun assumed that this happened while they were collecting wood for buildings. Ayan was shocked. This little girl had always helped everyone, and now she was lying there without strength. A shaman entered the building and, instead of offering sympathy, made a cold statement that the granddaughter got what she deserved because she constantly disobeyed her elders. All this, they say, happened because they trusted the imperial bastard Vityr. Ahun tried to object. It was already too much. But the shaman didn't listen and simply hit the boy, telling him to shut up. In his opinion, this was a punishment from the gods, and to fix everything, a ritual was needed. However, Vikir already had a plan for help. He quickly gave orders: disinfect everything, boil the water, create conditions for the child in which she could fight the disease. We had to buy time. Vikir could save her, but he needed Ayen's help to do so. He will have to go beyond the forest to find a cure. Ayen said that Aquila would never let him leave so easily. The escape will have to be kept secret. The only question is whether Ayan will allow him to do so. The protagonist immediately set off, but the archer did not lag behind. She needed to at least know where he was going and why he was taking the Pomeranian with him. Ayan was always inferior to Visir and could not demand answers. She knew that as soon as she got them, he would simply disappear. But it was important for her to hear at least one thing. Would he come back? The vicar only promised to come, and the next moment he was gone. Meanwhile, Chiwa Baskerville was bored with the monotony of his work. He recalled how difficult but interesting it was to work with the young consul. He still couldn't believe that Vikir was dead, and suddenly the protagonist appeared right in front of him, calmly asking if he was called. This meeting was so unexpected that the old politician could not help but scream. He must have been heard throughout the house of underdog again. Finally, Vikir decided to reveal the whole truth to his only friend. Chiahua was delighted. The young hero not only fought a forest monster, but also settled among the barbarians. The Secretary-General was even moved, because his ward was indeed alive. But he was even more interested in who this cub was, who so resembled Visir. The protagonist explained that they were indeed of the same blood, but it was definitely not his child. Now Chihua will look after the Pomeranian and at the same time teach her the basics of survival. If he needs help, he should find Synod of Dunaro, the same thief whom Visir pardoned 2 years ago. But Chiahua had another question. When would Vikir return? The protagonist only cryptically noted that after he completes all his affairs. After all, he has a promise that must be fulfilled. To heal Sister Ahuna is a drop of holy water from the Quo Vadis clan. So he immediately sets off for the religious lands. Everyone is thoroughly checked before entering the territory of Quo Vadis. The poor oil and petroleum merchant was no exception. However, there was one very valuable commodity hidden in his barrels, and that was why the man was so nervous. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, and the merchant reached the city of Holy Mecca. Finally, a real monster emerged from the barrel. In gratitude, he left the man bare and bull fangs. I think you already guessed who it was. The vizier again chose an unconventional way of traveling, but he still reached the Holy Lands. Due to the influence of the church, any desires, from greed to carnal pleasures, were strictly forbidden here. The believers strictly followed all the rules, and when the bells rang, they fell to their knees right in the middle of the street. This is how Vikir penetrated the poorest areas of the city. He had with him the Red Death bacteria, which he extracted from the sweat, blood, and tears of Sister Ahun. If this liquid gets into the well, the locals will immediately get sick. The method is tough, but the situation is urgent, and every minute counts. Suddenly, 3 boys noticed him. They immediately sensed danger from the stranger. But Vikir was not at a loss. He turned to the kids and strictly ordered them to remember his words. This well is cursed. Whoever drinks from it will surely die. Tell everyone about it. The children were frightened, and without waiting for the repetition, ran and shouted that the ghost had cursed the well. The witch was pleased. Now the baby will definitely not touch this water and get infected. And finally, he left behind the Leviathan clan dagger, known for its deadly poison. The Holy Family and the Poison Clan have long been at odds, so this will ignite another large-scale confrontation. Preparations are complete. You can now visit Santa Dolores. A crowd had gathered around Dolores's palace late at night. The rich and courtiers begged her to open the gates and heal their illnesses. They promised to pay with money, estates, and luxurious gifts. But for the saint, this was not enough to receive visitors at such a time. She ordered them to go away. Among the crowd stood Vikir. In his past life, he had often seen the saint on the front lines of battles, bloodied, exhausted, but ready to the last to save the wounded. But the Dolores he knew despised money and power. The protagonist knelt down in front of the gate, pretending to be a lost lamb, and right in front of him, the door opened. A pleasant female voice came from inside, asking how he had lost his way. The vicar immediately replied that he had come to report an epidemic spreading in the poor neighborhoods. But a voice suddenly accused him of lying. The knights lined up on the balconies, and their commander, Pedro Vadas, declared that the lost lamb was speaking too aggressively. Vikir hadn't seen this man for a long time, the same one he had trusted with his back in battle. Pedro was committed to justice and never compromised with lawlessness. The commander declared that the stranger would not meet with the saint until he removed his mask. The vicar had a reason not to take it down. Besides, his work was already done and he was about to leave. But the knights had no intention of just letting someone so suspicious go. Pedro felt that the water brought by Vikir radiated evil energy. He suspected that the stranger might have deliberately spread the epidemic to lure out the saint. And Pedro didn't like to talk for long, he just rushed into the attack. The protagonist couldn't use his usual powers, otherwise everyone would immediately know who he was. So I had to rely on the sword. First, he attacked Pedro, using the 600-kilogram strength of the bear. Then he lit the knight's magic book with the flame of Cerberus. And in the end, with incredible force, he sent his opponent straight into the fountain. The knights could not believe that Sir Pedro had lost to some stranger. But the fight was suddenly interrupted. Saint Dolores personally went out to the lost lamb. But to her, he looked more like a small puppy covered in abrasions. She calmly ordered tea to be brought so she could talk to this person. Saint Dolores was now about 16 years old. In the future, during the war with demons, she will rescue the wounded on the front lines, saving an incredible number of lives. In those days, every martial artist, including Visir, respected her. The girl said that she had been feeling very stressed recently. She entered the Colosseum, and during the holidays, she tried to relax at home. However, nobles and merchants sought out meetings with her regardless of the time of day. They were all sick from drugs or sexually transmitted infections and did not deserve God's help. Justice, fairness, and mercy are the will of God, but these people saw only what was right in front of their noses. Vikir intervened and spoke about the inevitable process of getting to know people, from which no one can escape. Then he remembered the epidemic spreading through poor neighborhoods. Dolores asked coldly if he himself was involved in this. The wizard demonstrated his magic and explained that he did not like to harm innocents because this place was his native home. The Holy Virgin was surprised. Before her stood the believing Lun. Vikir said that he personally saw people contaminating the well. Dolores didn't understand who could benefit from their family's downfall. The protagonist assumed that the Leviathan clan was the first to be interested in this. They could use the epidemic as a chance to destroy their sworn enemy. But don't forget about the bourgeois family, who will find a way to make money even from chaos. Although everything said was just a hypothesis, Dolores was amazed by this man's ability to predict future incidents so clearly. She wanted to know who he was. The wizard only hinted that he was called the Night Hound, an ominous nickname, but his words rang true. Therefore, the Holy House urgently needs to inspect the poor neighborhoods and report the results to her father. The vicar was satisfied. Now everything will go much faster. But the Holy Virgin was tormented by another question. How could the man who defeated Pedro and all the Knights of the Order look so small and miserable? His soul smelled of a mixture of blood, oil, and iron. Cruelty and suppressed anger took on the color of hatred. But amidst all this, in the depths of the seething emotions, there was immense longing and sadness. The saint immediately went to the scene of the incident. The epidemic was already gaining momentum, and more people were becoming its victims. The vicar felt sorry that he had to suffer so much. Dolores was also amazed by what she saw. She sincerely sympathized with these people and began to pray. Her words, like a heavenly bell, echoed throughout the church. And suddenly, one of her tears flashed with a golden glow that filled everything around. The sick were healed, and Vikir was convinced of Dolores' incredible life-giving power. Now he needed to bring the miracle of her tears to the deep forest. The Holy Virgin understood that healing the sick by God's power was only a temporary measure. And if they were becoming more and more numerous, it could only mean one thing. Somewhere in the poor areas, a well was contaminated. In addition, the disease progressed slowly, but for a long time. To completely stop its spread, Dolores had to create just one drop of concentrated God's power. And for now, she went to see the sick. Absolute altruism and self-sacrifice, that was the closest thing to God's love. But even more difficult trials awaited her ahead, because not only patients, but also saints suffered. The Holy Virgin was ashamed that she had not been there all this time. But now she has come, and what she saw shocked her to the core. Even the priest could not believe that anything but God's power could help. But Vikir used some incredible methods. The protagonist allowed the blessing to penetrate the infected area. This discovery was a real breakthrough, and everyone began to follow suit. Dolores had not expected such devotion from the Night Hound. She could not have imagined that he was so skilled in using God's power. Well, it's time to explain what this divine power was. It was the prayer of a servant who reached God, who accepted it and gave strength in return. Its amount depended on devotion to God. But Vikir knew a way to increase this power and help more people. In his past life, when demons took over the earth, there were too many injured. And then God saw the desperation of the priests, who were physically unable to cope. Killing monsters became an act of faith. And even without being a holy servant, one could use God's power to destroy demons. Thanks to this, the vicar was able to use it in the holy place. Meanwhile, among the sick, a girl mourned her mother, who had fallen ill. The protagonist gave her money, at least for food, so she could take care of her mother. But the priest intervened. Material assistance was unacceptable. The thirst for money knew no bounds. But Vikir's purse had limits. He could give everything, and he felt sorry for these people. These words struck Dolores. She didn't understand why the Night Hound was talking about regret and asking for forgiveness. Was he helping for the same reason she was? Did he also feel pain because he couldn't save more people? Dolores's heart clenched painfully. She was still young and inexperienced. But now her heart began to beat faster because of the mysterious man standing before her. After such fruitful work, everyone needs rest. The witch chose a secluded spot, but not for long. Dolores quickly found it. She wanted to talk to the man who had saved so many sick people. The girl decided to share her story. Dolores was simply lucky to be born with God's power, but she did not understand why God chose her, so weak, as a saint. The vicar reacted immediately. It is the suffering and the feeling of guilt that make her choice by God not accidental. The world needs light that illuminates even the darkest places. Dolores wanted with all her heart to be the person who could say such words. The Quo Vadis family did their job flawlessly. Thanks to one young virgin, 3 drops of concentrated holy water were created. Her name is Tear of the Saint. Dolores's heart was breaking, and she could barely endure this difficult, painful day. But now this essence of God's power will be kept safe. After that, Dolores went to her father. Cardinal Lun Humbert praised his daughter for her sacrifice. Dolores told him all the details. They finally found the source of the contaminated water. But not everything was that simple. Suspicious objects were found near the well emblems of the Leviathan and Bourgeois clans. Humbert was furious. These fanatics dared to sully the name of God himself. He ordered Dolores to declare a holy war, and also capture the Night Hound and force him to confess. This stranger aroused his suspicion, but Dolores did not obey. Vikir's innocence. But this was not enough. Humbert made the final decision. He would find and interrogate this stranger himself. The paladins have already set out in search of the Night Hound. Soon the cardinal was told disturbing news. One of the saint's tears disappeared from storage. Dolores thought, is this what the Night Hound came for? Ayen spent almost her entire life in slavery. As a child, she was kidnapped and forced to fight in the arena, turning her into a tool for profit. Her fate was unbearably cruel, and so she ended up in a cage, put up for sale. But then he appeared, Vikir. He freed her, giving her freedom. Ayen woke up in tears. Even in her sleep, she was haunted by nightmares in which she tried in vain to find Visir. The pain in her chest only grew worse, as if her heart was drying up. Aquila reassured her daughter, saying that life always brings surprises. We just have to wait for Vikir's return. He will definitely find a way to cure her illness. And Mother was right, as if fate itself had decreed that Vikir returned that same day. Aquila had just opened her mouth to say that she was right when Ayen had already rushed towards him. She still remembered the fear she felt on the day of her release. But Vikir taught her to overcome her fears. He showed her that it was possible to fight and win, and now her savior and friend was there again. Ayen was overjoyed, like Vikir himself, who has finally returned. The vizier immediately set out for Ahun's sister. The poor girl was covered in red spots, but as soon as he took out the tear of the saint, a bright light illuminated the room. The illness receded instantly. It seems that these medicines really worked. But there were many sick people, and the situation in other tribes was critical. Fortunately, there is enough magic essence for everyone. Besides, Vikir had already killed the swamp monster Ka, but there was no time for chatter. That night, all the barbarian tribes gathered near the largest lake. The vicar began the ritual by pouring the essence of the saint's tears completely into the water, which immediately shone with a golden light. Now the sick only had to drink it, and all the inhabitants of the forest were able to easily overcome the disease thanks to divine power. Very soon, the reservoirs will be cleaned up and the bacteria will completely disappear. Now Vikir has become a true hero of the Balax. The inhabitants of the deep forest were preparing for a grand festival, but first they needed to find out the most important thing: who spread the disease in the forest. Meanwhile, the shaman Ahiman was convinced that everyone had already become infected, and he was about to cure the tribe with his antidote. His plan seemed perfect. After that, people would simply have no choice but to idolize him. But something went wrong. The village was bustling with life, and Ahiman could not understand why everything was in perfect order. The water in the lake became even cleaner than before, and fish were swimming everywhere. How could this happen? Vikir, noticing his confusion, asked what had shocked the shaman so much. Ahiman was about to explode in anger, calling him an imperial bastard. But suddenly he realized that all the inhabitants of the village appeared behind him. Aquila asked in surprise how it happened that an infection created by the hands of one of the clans suddenly ended up in the forest. Ahiman only made excuses, saying that he was simply performing a rite to heal the tribe. The only surprising thing is that after that he didn't even return to the village. The wizard, as always, turned out to be right. He predicted the shaman's actions. It only remained to find out what was in Ahiman's sack. Isn't this the same antidote that he so carefully prepared? Ahiman had his reasons for acting so meanly. His story was not an easy one. Once upon a time, he was captured by a shaman of one of the tribes, and so he joined the Baloks. However, he later killed the very man who was planning a coup in the community and appropriated all of his power. To get used to life in the tribe, Ahiman did everything at once, and eventually he was accepted as part of the community. But in his old age, he longed for what he had been deprived of in his youth. More precisely, he tried to seize power by overstepping the authority of the matriarch and planned to capture the entire forest. But now he was cornered, and everyone demanded to see the bag. Ahiman, being cunning, apparently accidentally dropped him into the river. The wizard was right again. But now they had no proof that the shaman actually had the antidote with him. To prove Ahiman's guilt, it was decided to summon the Iliad, an ancient method of resolving conflicts in which the Baloks side with the winner and find the loser guilty. Tradition cannot be broken, so the duel had to take place immediately. And it seems that this battle is wearing on the nerves of even the most steadfast listeners. The Iliad took place in a warrior circle on the sacred mountain where the ancestors of the Baloks rested. All the barbarians were rooting for Visir, and Ahiman found himself at an extreme disadvantage. So without hesitation, he summoned his skeleton warriors. They were to watch for blind spots while the shaman himself prowled around looking for a moment to attack. But Vikir mastered a new skill, Silent Step, obtained after killing King Rikakar. So these creatures didn't even notice him approaching. One well-aimed blow and the dagger pierced Ahiman's body. The winner was determined. However, the shaman was not going to die so easily. The body shuddered in agony after being hit by Weaselwool, but he couldn't accept losing to this imperial bastard. With the last of his strength, he dipped his finger in his own blood and drew a rune. Ominous clouds enveloped the sacred mountain, and a purple glow lit up the air. Aquila and Ayen were wary of the eerie energy rising from the graves. The vizier also did not understand what was happening. His blow was fatal. Ahiman, like a madman, whispered strange prayers. The Vicar swung to end it once and for all. But suddenly an arrow fell at his feet. The shaman muttered that now the ancestors themselves would make the decision. It is time for the dead to judge this dispute. What happens next is even more shocking, so get ready. There were many graves on this mountain, and now all the ancestors stood against the living Baloks. But there was one important person on their side. Aquila immediately ordered everyone to prepare for a fierce battle. Her arrows knew no mercy. A single shot instantly destroyed even the undead who wielded a sword at the level of high-ranking experts. The Night Fox Aquila was truly majestic. But Vikir and Ayan had an equally important task: to catch up with Ahiman. The shaman didn't run away for no reason. His opponent was the brilliant Aquila, the strongest leader in history. But even she couldn't handle what he was cooking. Ahiman began to perform a mysterious rite. Ayan wasn't going to wait and planned to kill him right there. Her arrow never found its victim. The ritual was already over. The legends did not lie. The one who slept alone in the deep forest finally woke up. The divine archer Adonai. The wizard immediately understood. This was the same man from the Balak legends. His first arrow flew straight into our two heroes. Vikir was able to redirect it with the help of Weaselwool. However, the tip grazed Ayen's leg, leaving a wound that burned with black fire. It was like poison. It seems that the legends were not false. The bow of Adonai was created from the remains of Madame Octopus's legs. The situation was becoming critical. And of course, Vikir could not help but protect Ayan. Meanwhile, the shaman ordered his immortal archer to kill everyone. However, the arrow never reached its target. Aquila intercepted her with her bare hands. The leader intended to speak with Ahiman. Aquila came for a reason. She felt an extremely powerful aura. And they did the right thing because a new opponent appeared before them. The leader quickly got rid of the poison that was in Adonai's arrow. She simply blew up her own aura, purifying her blood, a brilliant move. Ahiman's betrayal worried her little. She was only interested in one thing. Was the divine archer Adonai really standing before her? The shaman, unable to contain his joy, shouted that it was really him and that Aquila would not dare to speak out against him. But the matriarch had completely different plans. She immediately ordered Ayan and Vikiru not to interfere. It was an honor for her to meet Adonai in battle and find out who was stronger. Without wasting time, she was the first to attack. Her arrows flew one after another, but the brilliant Balak dodged with incredible ease. But he immediately responded with powerful shots. However, they did not achieve their goal either. It seemed like this battle would drag on for a long time. The vicar could not believe that he was witnessing such a spectacle. But the shaman knew what to expect from the night fox. But he was sure that she would not be able to defeat his warrior. After all, Adonai was already dead. Despite this, Aquila fought on equal terms. Her melee strikes were as powerful as her gunshots. However, one of her arrows still changed the course of the battle. The great ancestor seemed to hesitate. Perhaps he didn't want to harm his own offspring. Whatever the case, Aquila could only do one thing: free him from this state. But at the last moment, the arrow was stopped by a hand woven from pure darkness. Adonai's body, which tried to resist his spells to the last. And while Ahiman was in danger, the divine archer was forced to fight at full strength. The divine archer's dead body began to change. It was no longer Adonai. Now a real demonic being stood before them. A-rank monsters that lived in the forest gathered around. But it took only 3 arrows for Adonai to destroy them. Now he had only one goal: to kill Aquila. The matriarch had a hard time. Each blow caused Madame Octopus's poison to spread throughout her body. The Night Fox needed to end this battle as soon as possible. But Adonai dodged all her arrows, and the one that flew straight at his head, he destroyed with one movement. Ayan was worried about her mother. It seemed like the entire forest was feeling this battle. Aquila had to hold out until Vikir found a solution. The protagonist understood that he needed to stop the resurrection process and kill Ahiman. Shaman, afraid Aquila, hiding behind Adonai, avoiding direct combat. But Vikir quickly found him. But you can't kill it with one blow. Ahiman was guarded by other dead men, beings so powerful that they seemed capable of dealing with any emperor. Meanwhile, Aquila was suffering increasingly severe blows. She could no longer stand and knelt before Adonai. The shaman shouted that he would soon become the ruler of this forest. But that didn't happen. The 6th Baskerville technique destroyed all the dead. And now a young hero stood before Ahiman. At the shaman's command, Adonai shot an arrow at Vikir. But even she couldn't catch up with him. The vicar was on a whole other level. With one blow, he cut off Ahiman's hand. And the next thing is to cut his body into pieces. Adonai's body began to decompose, and dark magic lost its power over the divine archer. Aquila asked the great ancestor to rest in peace. The shaman's severed head was still screaming that he was so close. But Vikir finally finished him off. Ahiman tried to hiss something else, but his head was pierced by an arrow from his own grandson. This terrible part of the story is finally over. The Balaks returned to the village, but only ruins awaited them there. Sister Ahuna said that while they were fighting, Madame Octopus came and caused a riot. And it was no accident. It turned out that Ahiman had prepared everything so that she would appear at the very moment of battle. Aquila could barely contain her rage. Despite her serious injuries, she gave clear and intelligent orders. Even the wolf Iron suffered. Poor Bakira injured her paw. Madame Octopus was truly the evil goddess of the forest. The Balaks always perceived her as a living catastrophe and never had the opportunity to take revenge. But Vikir already had a new plan. That same evening, he came to the matriarch with a single request: learn more about Madame. He already had information gathered about this giant spider. But one important question remained. Why were all the tribes so afraid of her and didn't even try to unite to defeat the enemy? Aquila told about the old records of the Battle of Adonai against Madam. It was the battle of the god of light against the evil goddess, and he managed to pierce one of her paws. But this was only the beginning of despair. The more claws Adonai destroyed, the faster they grew back on Madame. They were getting stronger, and even his arrows could not pierce her body. Judging by the records, everyone who fought then died from her poison. Aquila warned that attacking Madame would be suicidal. I don't know yet, but when it comes to a strong monster, it changes the rules of the game. If he finds this monster's weakness, he will definitely kill it. The wizard got into a real adventure, spying on Madame Octopus. Several days of research yielded results. He noticed that Spiderling went hunting at a certain time, and now he had 2 hours to spare. That's how he ended up near her lair. The web turned out to be surprisingly strong, so the hero decided to use it. Like a true madman, he rushed into the very depths of the lair. Dried victims hung on the walls, but he didn't have time to look at them. His attention was drawn to a whole clutch of spider eggs, an important find. The wizard decided to take one for analysis, but unexpectedly, Madame herself appeared above the lair. The situation became critical. It seemed that Spider instinctively sensed that someone had entered her territory. Fortunately, the Vikir managed to hide, and Madame, not noticing the stranger, disappeared again. Ayen began to worry. It was no secret that Vikir had been actively asking about Madame, and his curiosity clearly went beyond ordinary curiosity. But this time he himself called her to his tent. There was a whole makeshift laboratory there. The wizard said that he had collected records about the spider from various tribes and also managed to obtain her egg. Ayan immediately understood what this was all about. He was going to fight Madame. However, Vikir planned to leave the forest soon. True, when he finishes his business with his family, he may return. And if so, then he needs to protect the place he wants to return to. The plan to hunt Madame was complete. Ayan knew perfectly well that Vikir always faced problems that were impossible to solve, and yet emerged victorious. So this time, she had no doubt about a successful outcome. The vicar only confirmed her opinion. But before facing Spider-Man, he had one more important task to complete. He set out to meet a special forest monster, the salamander, and took away her ability to regenerate. The next day, the unexpected happened. Vikir disappeared. Ayan immediately understood what was happening. She only silently begged the god of the forest to bless the great warrior who was about to face a real disaster. The protagonist knew for sure that it would rain soon. At such a moment, Madame Octopus was usually asleep, which meant it was the best time to attack. The vizier had calculated in advance all the possible options for hunting her, but he developed plans in case of any development of events. The hunt for Madame Octopus has begun. The hero immediately used Baskerville techniques, delivering devastating blows to the spider's paws. As predicted in Adonai's records, each severed limb instantly grew back to double its size. In that case, Vikir should have gone to plan A. He struck hundreds of blows, continuously slashing at the monster's paws, causing the creature to panic. Cornered, Madame released her deadly venom. It immediately began to spread throughout Vikir's body. But he didn't hesitate. Even though he didn't want to, he had to use his newly acquired ability. In an instant, the severed arm grew back. The protagonist continued to approach the monster. Blow after blow was showered upon this monster. His efforts were not in vain. Madame has already grown a bunch of extra paws to replace the lost ones. That is exactly what he was striving for. Now it's time to get out of her lair. The Vikir knew that he was inferior to the spider in speed, but his plan involved doubling her limbs. It was her special gift, which had now become a curse. Too many paws only hindered her from moving. Expected, Madame tried to use the spider web. She was also special. Ordinary fire couldn't take her. But it instantly turned to ash under the influence of the hellfire of the underworld. In addition, Spider's lair was filled with cadaver gas, making it an ideal place for the flames to spread. The octopus tarnished its karma, blinded by its own power. And now the moment has finally come to clean it. Because Vikir found Madame's weakness. All that remained was to make sure she didn't escape from her lair. Due to the excessive number of paws, the creature could not move normally, and without a web, escape was impossible. It didn't matter how strong its shell was. As long as there was life and breath inside, heat and smoke were already swirling in the air, gradually burning away its insides. All that remained was to wait for Spider-Man's death to take away her abilities. But suddenly the mountain split. Madame destroyed her own lair and broke free, shooting poison into the sky like a festive salute. The wizard realized that the monster could not find him. Her eyes and the sensitive hairs on her body were burned in the fire. And after the collapse, the mountain also forced her body to work to the limit. The shell was covered in deep cracks, so the task could still be completed. The protagonist aimed directly at one of these cracks and struck with the Baskerville technique. The force of the impact threw him back. But something strange happened. Something around Madame tore apart, and the next moment, Vikir saw her eyes. He made a mistake. It turned out that the Spider-Woman could shed her old shell along with her extra legs, restoring her body. Vikir understood. There was no need to delay. The battle had to be ended immediately. But suddenly I heard a strange voice. Someone mockingly asked why he was fighting this monster at all. After all, it was to his advantage. He should have left the forest a long time ago and thought only about Hugo. Revenge is his only true desire. Plus, the soul blamed Visir for becoming stupid and slow. She insisted. One only has to remember the hatred for Hugo, the feeling when the patriarch cut his throat. The soul came to recall the same despair of a past life. But now he has ruined everything. The murder of Hugo and the destruction of the Baskerville family. These are the sole purposes of his existence. Even in a past life, he tried to go against Hugo's will. But in the end, he followed the path that his shackles had determined for him. He was just another trained hound. The vicar shouted that these thoughts should not be imposed on him, neither Hugo's orders nor his own desire for revenge. No one else had the right to command him. After his execution, he was not going to live like a bloodhound hunting prey. He regretted the choices he made in his past life. What he really wanted was something completely different. Freedom. He realized that he only wants to live the way he wants to. He shouted to himself that he needed to get up and fight so that nothing could control him anymore. And suddenly, Madame's paws were hit by arrows. On the top of the mountain stood warriors. Ian shouted that this damned spider would not dare touch her candidate for husband. The Balacs came to fight alongside him. The warriors sincerely wanted to help the hero of their forest. The Vikir, of course, was angry that Ian had not listened to him. But it was thanks to her that he survived again. Gathering all his strength, he struck a powerful blow at the crack in Madame's shell. But that wasn't enough. The octopus was frantically struggling. The hero had already cornered it. You can't stop. Aquila always considered Madame a disaster, without even thinking about destroying her. But the young warriors showed her how to overcome fear and stand up against what seemed impossible. The Night Fox will do this even if her wounds reopen. For the sake of the warriors who fought with such desperation, she would clear their way. Her arrow pierced Madame with incredible speed. The Vicar instantly rushed to the attack. His blow was full of madness. He maniacally used every Baskerville technique. It was as if he was breaking the very shackles that had held him all this time. All this time, the Vikir was inside Madame, and only now did he manage to escape. He simply jumped out of her eye. The spider gradually fell to the ground, and the poison in her blood penetrated into the Vikir. It seemed that after so many attacks, the monster was having a hard time keeping its life within itself. So you need to act quickly and get rid of the poison. The Vicar released Weselwool into the spider's body. The sword devoured the essence of this monster completely. After that, he was found on the ground. He was whole, though exhausted. Ian was beaming with joy, although she was no less worried about him. The festival lasted for an unknown number of days. The Balacs were ready to celebrate this victory forever. After the murder, Madame Visir managed to use the 7th technique of the Baskerville family, although he didn't have enough skill for that. Hugo now possessed it at the highest level, while Visir's was only in its infancy. However, he definitely became much stronger. It's time to return to your clan. The decision was made. The mother herself allowed the hero of their forest to leave. He became part of their family, which means the bond between them will not weaken even at a distance. At all times and in all places, he remained the commander of the Balac tribe, and that should not be forgotten. But that wasn't the main thing. Ian didn't come to say goodbye. All the Balacs will be waiting for his return, but she has disappeared. However, a young archer was already waiting for him in the field. Ian wanted to say goodbye in person and even prepared a gift. It was Anubis, the giant bow used by Adnai. She adjusted it so that Vikir could shoot it, and she hung a broken chain around his neck, a symbol that he was no longer a hound, but had become a free wolf. Ian silently leaned against him, and then she gave me a goodbye kiss. Her eyes filled with tears. They said goodbye, but not forever. Someday our hero will return here again. The first thing Vikir did was go to the same fortress he had been to 2 years ago. It was here that he last saw Camus Morgue. In the middle of the village stood a giant golden statue. Unexpectedly, a guard approached the young hero and threatened him not to touch the monument. It turned out that it was built in honor of the hero who saved the Morgue family, the Hound of Baskerville. The protagonist was stunned. After that, he headed to the local pub. His mysterious appearance immediately caught the attention of the Morgue triplets. The girls started shouting so that the stranger wouldn't ignore them and come closer. Vikir and ordered him to remove his hood. However, he himself was going to announce his return, so there was no point in hiding anymore. When the hero revealed his face, the triplets froze in amazement. A truly handsome man stood before them, and only one of the guards immediately recognized him as the legendary hero, Vikir. The next day, the sisters sent a messenger owl to the Baskerville family. But before leaving, Vikir wanted to know how Camus was doing. It turned out that she was now training behind closed doors. The girl abruptly left the Hall of Light and went to the Hall of Darkness, where she studies magic. This alarmed Visya because in the past, Camus had a bad relationship with the head of the Hall of Darkness, Snake. It seems like this is another event he unconsciously changed. The protagonist asked her to deliver a message, to leave the Hall of Darkness and meet with him. News of the great hero's return spread like wildfire. It seems that the entire empire already knew about this. But most importantly, now Patriarch Baskerville has also learned about him. This time, Vikir entered Chihuahua through the main entrance. The vice-consul finally returned to Underdog. The Pomeranian was happy to see her uncle again. The girl proudly showed off the little mouse she had caught, and Chihuahua said that thanks to Cindy, all the problems in the city had been solved. However, there was one thing she couldn't fix. Recently, children from poor neighborhoods have been disappearing without a trace one after another. These were clearly not kidnappings for ransom, as no one contacted their parents. The children seemed to be being taken by monsters. There was no evidence, but Chihuahua was certain that one person was behind it all. Suddenly, Vikir realized something terrible. This disappearance of the children in Underdog? It was painfully reminiscent of the same situation he would be accused of a few years later in a past life. Somehow these events were connected, but his thoughts were interrupted by Pomeranian. She showed that the mouse she had caught earlier had come to life. Vikir and Chihuahua froze in shock. The protagonist quickly understood. The child had used mana from another dimension. It turned out that she had learned this quite recently. In the Baskerville and Morgue families, children began practicing magic no earlier than the age of 8. But the 5-year-old Pomeranian was already using mana from another dimension, a rare, almost intangible kind of power. She was a true genius in black magic. And if Hugo finds out about this, he will execute her without hesitation. The patriarch was too predictable, and they shouldn't even cross paths. Suddenly, Chihuahua received a letter. The news was bad. Hugo was already heading to Underdog. The vicar and the patriarch were silent for a long time. The protagonist immediately hid the Pomeranian in the next room, hoping that everything would be okay. The patriarch immediately asked what his son had been doing all this time. The wizard said that he had lived among the barbarians and now had a plan to destroy them. His idea was to cut off food supplies from the empire by forcing the barbarians to hunt monsters in exchange for food. Eventually, the monsters will become extinct in the process. Hugo was pleased. He had not expected anything less from his son. For the first time in a long time, a smile appeared on his face. Even the butler hadn't seen such an expression since the moment of Vikir's disappearance. Of course, the protagonist didn't want the Ballocks to suffer because of the Baskervilles. Officially, they will be considered dead in the fight against monsters, but in reality, they will simply move to Madam's territory. However, Hugo added another important detail. He had no intention of trading with the Rococo tribe. They planned to completely destroy it. In reality, the father simply hadn't seen his son for many years, and all this time he had only cursed the barbarians. So now he didn't want Vikir to take risks on the front lines again. The diplomatic benefits that Baskerville had received no longer mattered to him. The vicar thanked him for his concern. Suddenly, the Pomeranian ran into the room. She was scared because of the thunderstorm. Hugo stood up abruptly. Hugo didn't even notice the familiar cold mask falling off his face. For the first time in many years, real emotion flashed in his eyes. For a moment, it seemed to him that Penelope was standing before him. The vicar immediately intervened, urging his father to calm down. In a calm, even tone, he explained that this girl was simply a child of the border tribes and had no relation to their family. Hugo finally came to. Yes, his daughter couldn't be that young. Taking a deep breath, the patriarch decided not to linger any longer. He was exhausted and headed to his chambers, but finally informed his son that he was waiting for him at the grand banquet tomorrow. Vikir agreed, left alone with his thoughts. It was difficult to fall asleep. Hugo's reaction really surprised him. Maybe it's time to tell him about the Pomeranian? No matter what happens, the main thing is to protect your niece. But just as he was pondering this, a silhouette flashed in the darkness of the room. Cindy stood before him. They hadn't seen each other for quite some time, and it seemed like she had shown up for a reason. The The girl brought the information he had ordered. This was the guest list for tomorrow's banquet. In addition to Hugo, his 2 brothers will be there. The first is the Boston Terrier, known to us as the leader of the pit bulls. The second is Gray, the commander of the Mastiffs. No doubt these 2 will try to recruit Vikir to their ranks. But there were other guests. Osiris is the one who in his youth became an exact copy of his father. In Vikir's past life, this boy was cold and reserved, like a stone. And finally, Seth Le Baskerville. He was in isolated training and was always sickly and weak, kind, gentle. The Vikir respected him only among the entire family. Now he will have the opportunity to meet Seth. And at the banquet itself, there will undoubtedly be a lot of interesting things happening. Visir was already waiting in the dining hall. The protagonist officially thanked for the invitation. And Hugo just nodded and ordered his son to sit at the table. The conversation immediately escalated into an argument between the patriarch's 2 brothers. The commanders of the 2 orders hotly debated where Vikir should join. The Mastiffs and Pitbull's offerings in the past would have been a real gift to him. But now, the young hero saw only 2 self-confident fools before him. The uncles wanted to see how much their nephew had grown. Hugo quickly stopped this chatter so that his son could rest in peace. Vikir calmly noted that his achievements were easy to demonstrate without even leaving the training hall. He proved it simply brilliantly. He noticed with his gaze that Uncle Terrier had been given too much wine, and Dane had been served undercooked meat. Just a moment, and the situation was corrected. Placing his hand on the table, he used mana, and the result stunned everyone. At 17, he reached the level of an intermediate expert. This was unexpected. 2 years ago, he had revealed his power in the fight against Madame, and he was sure that the news would have spread by now. But it seems the triplets kept everything a secret. And then something else amazing happened. Osiris unexpectedly praised his brother and urged him to continue in the same spirit. Visir's shock. The first successor to the Baskerville family, cold and ruthless, the one who most resembled Hugo, spoke words of support to him. Even Seth couldn't contain his surprise. Osiris praised someone? And smiled too? The younger brother looked closely at Vikir and asked if he even recognized him. Upon learning that the protagonist remembered him, Seth was delighted and admitted that he had planned to visit him after the banquet. His training took place not far from Underdog. The wizard remembered Seth well from his past life. It was he who defended him when he was accused, the only one Vikir would be happy to see at this banquet. But suddenly, a foul stench, a suffocating, repulsive smell that only he could recognize. The stench of demons. It seems that a monster is lurking among those present, and if Vikir was not mistaken, a terrible smell was coming from someone in this hall. Vikir noticed that Seth continued the conversation casually, trying to diffuse the situation. At first glance, the brother seemed the same as in his previous life. But why then did he smell so unbearably of demons? And also, his reflection. It wasn't in the glass. Maybe the real Seth is dead and a demon has taken over his body? It was dangerous to talk about it now. Vikir decided to gather as much information as possible. But that sweet smile made him feel suffocated, as if he were being slowly squeezed by icy fingers. Fortunately, Osiris diverted attention, and Vikir no longer had to endure the disgusting stench. And then the patriarch himself summoned him to his office. The dinner lasted as long as 5 hours, and it exhausted Vikir. Most likely, my father wanted to discuss admission to the academy. But even before meeting Hugo, an unexpected encounter awaited him. The triplets were just waiting for him on the street. The vizier was ready for battle. But instead of attacking, they knelt down. It looked like a knight's oath. The brothers came to pay off the debt. During the attack on the forest monster, for the first time in their lives, they felt not only fear, but also true respect. And that day, they decided to become the 3 spears of Visir van Baskerville. They begged the protagonist to accept them into his service. They swore to serve him forever. In a past life, these 3 became a fatal threat to Vikir. But now, he didn't need any oaths. The fact that they would now be together was worth hiding. The triplets were overjoyed to get what they wanted. But Vikir was only concerned about one thing: the demon that took over Seth's body. Whatever happens, this monster must die. But first, he went to the Patriarch. The Colosseum Academy is the largest educational institution in the Empire. In a past life, Vikir had visited her as a servant of the triplets, and the nobles had only looked at him with disdain. But those memories no longer bothered him. Hugo kept his word. Vikir would go to the academy. The triplets were traveling with him. However, before leaving, the protagonist wanted to receive his reward. The Morg family promised compensation for his disappearance, But Vakira was not interested in material gain. He just wanted to hear one story. Learn more about Miss Roxanne and Penelope. Hugo was wary. If the son asked about it just out of curiosity, then... But Vakir asked me to tell him first and only then ask about the reasons. And it was obvious. This was not just curiosity. The patriarch sighed heavily. Roxanne was the only woman he truly loved, and Penelope was his most precious treasure. Their marriage was not a deal between families. She was a simple girl without a title or money. But Hugo remembered their first meeting like it was yesterday. It was love at first sight. They went through the ordeal together. The Baskerville family pursued them, sending guards, but he fought to the death to protect Roxanne. Together, they overcame all obstacles, and through this love, Penelope was born. He did everything to preserve his happiness. But Roxana's health was failing, and she eventually left this world. Fortunately, their daughter grew up kind and bright. For Hugo to know that she was okay. But one day, everything changed. Penelope went for a walk and disappeared. She was kidnapped. Barbarians from the Rococo tribe, who somehow made their way into the very center of Baskerville territory. To this day, Hugo has found no trace of her. The patriarch fell silent and turned to Vakir. He wanted to know the reason for this interest. The protagonist silently took out the medallion and handed it to his father. He immediately recognized the thing. He had made it for Roxanne himself and later gave it to Penelope. The wizard asked, what would the father do if he found out that Penelope's descendant was alive? He calmly said, the patriarch has a grandson. Pomeranian ran into the hall. When he found this girl among the Rococo barbarians, she called the one who gave her the medallion her mother. Vakir hoped Hugo would be stunned. Will he be able to remain steadfast in front of his own granddaughter? Her origin left no room for doubt. If she was born among the Rococo, then her mother made an alliance with a barbarian. It was the pure truth. The vicar wanted to see his father tremble with despair. It was from this moment that his revenge was to begin. But it happened differently. Hugo and Pomeranian quickly found a common language. The girl carelessly called him Grandpa. Osiris and the butler watched this with genuine delight, and Vakir just watched and didn't understand. The Hugo he knew had simply disappeared. What kind of facial expression is that? Why did he look so happy? The vicar could not understand this. This day was to be fatal for the patriarch of the Baskervilles. But why was he laughing as if he were truly happy? Why didn't he look confused? The butler was sincerely grateful to the young owner. He never thought he would ever see a smile on Hugo's face. And Vakir didn't understand how it happened that all this happened because of him. The protagonist stood before his father, who was now completely defenseless. But why exactly did he feel so helpless? Why did you suddenly doubt your revenge? Even Cindy was shocked. It was the first time she had seen apathy on her boss's face. The girl arrived at night for a reason. She had already gathered all the necessary information about Seth, conducted a detailed investigation, and came across something very interesting. Baskerville Air secretly sponsored asylums while hiding behind a false identity. But there was no trace of those who took the children from there. If Seth is indeed a demon, it seems he has been kidnapping children to use for his own purposes. And what's worse, he was connected to the case of the missing children in the town of Underdog. Vakir missed this detail. This meant that even in his past life, he had unknowingly served a demon. Seth had always sympathized with him. This simply couldn't be, but all the facts pointed to the truth. Seth really did kidnap children. He would take them to his cave, and something terrible would happen there. The creature was feeding. Seth was one of the 10 elite demons, Andromalius. Seth was not satisfied with what he had already done. The demon wanted to create an entire organization that would raise children like pets. The 8th demon, of course, was against it. It was too risky. People might find out about their existence. The monster also warned against spreading its stench, as the Baskervilles have a very keen sense of smell. But Seth had foreseen this and had set traps around his hideout. The 10 elite corpses were to focus on opening the gates that would lead the world to its downfall, all for the sake of destroying the human race. With that, the 8th demon disappeared. But Seth remained dissatisfied. The problem was Vakiri, and he had to get rid of him as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Visa walked with Hugo. The patriarch knew very well how much his son hated him. He always treated his own children like fighting hounds and sent them on dangerous adventures. The cruelty towards Vakir began in childhood, all for the sake of revenge against the barbarians. But now the patriarch asked for forgiveness and sincerely thanked him. This relief only came about thanks to the Pomeranian. That's why Vakir could ask for anything, not as a reward for the hound, but as a gesture of genuine gratitude. From the moment of his return, the protagonist realized the cold, ruthless Hugo no longer exists. But this only drove him into a dead end. What to choose, revenge or forgiveness? First, there was one important thing to finish, and for this, the vicar needed the patriarch's help. Meanwhile, Seth came to Pomeranian. In fact, Hugo strictly forbade anyone from approaching his granddaughter. However, the second heir asked to keep his visit a secret. The girl's hair reminded Seth of the patriarch's daughter, but the nanny immediately realized that Seth hadn't even been born yet and couldn't have known that. The demon instantly realized he had messed up, but quickly corrected the situation by scaring her into silence. The monster openly spoke about the Pomeranian's resemblance to Hugo's daughter and wife. How interesting. If he kills her, how much will the patriarch suffer? Seth was unexpectedly interrupted. Osiris appeared at the very moment when his brother was left alone with Pomerian and asked in surprise what he was doing here. The demon immediately defended himself, stating that when he arrived, the nanny was gone. Osiris knew perfectly well that Hugo would be angry if he found out about this, so the brothers decided to keep everything a secret. Despite this, Osiris was genuinely concerned about Set and even offered his help. But these words, like poison, stung the demon to the very core, and he left immediately. Osiris exhaled heavily. For the first time in his life, he openly said that he was worried. As a descendant of the patriarch, he always tried to be like his father. But now, the one he knew as cold-blooded and emotionless was allowing himself to show feelings. Osiris wanted this too, to live without hiding behind a mask, to show the emotions that were raging inside. And all this became possible thanks to a little girl who appeared in the Baskerville family. Meanwhile, Seth was seething with anger. He had the perfect chance to get rid of Pomeranian, if not for that damned Osiris who unexpectedly intervened. But there is still plenty of time. We just need to find a way. Poison her, like Roxanne once did, and make it look like an accidental death? Should we use barbarians, as in the case of Penelope? No, this time he wants to get rid of the last girl of the Baskerville family in the most cruel way possible. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a signal. Someone had damaged the traps around the cave. Seth suddenly became alert. Who could have broken in here? Vikir calmly entered the cave. He kept his promise to visit his brother. The protagonist explained that he had been following him all this time. But now he wonders, what is his brother doing in such a chaotic place? As if he is the same demon behind the disappearance of children in the town of Underdog. Seth seemed to glow. Did his little brother really know everything? The vicar was surprised that the demon wasn't even trying to hide his true nature anymore. But what surprised him even more? Seth didn't even hide his confidence. Since Vikir came here empty-handed, he probably wouldn't mind being chopped to pieces right now. But before he could finish that thought, the vizier cut off his hand with one blow. Seth felt a terrible pain, as if his soul had been ripped out. What was it? How could this boy have a relic of the great Lord of the Flies? Vikir just shook his head. This was exactly the kind of knowledge he expected from one of the 10 elite corps. Seth's insides shuddered even more when he caught a familiar scent in the air. The boy's soul smelled of the blood of his relatives. Had he really been to hell itself? The protagonist didn't give him time to think. He calmly ordered the demon to wake up. Let him die that easily. In Vikir's past life, the world was plunged into chaos. A gate opened in the sky, connecting the human world with the demon kingdom. And when they began their invasion, they called it the Fall. Those who opened the gate were the 10 most powerful demons who were the first to set foot on Earth. During a long war with demons, Vikir met one of them. The outcome of the battle was miserable. Out of 667 soldiers, only one survived, and 666 fighters died. Who would have thought that in this life, Visa would encounter one of those demons? And 10 years early. He looked around. Did all these skeletons belong to children? Anger rose in him like a storm. Seth noticed this immediately and smugly declared that they were all inside him. And if the Vikir is so upset, the demon can bring them back. The answer was a sharp movement of the sword. The demon's hand flew to the ground. But within seconds it grew back. Seth already understood that the opponent before him was not so simple. His power and the presence of the great Lord of the Flies relic meant only one thing. Vikir must be killed immediately. However, Vikir himself was not going to die just like that. Using the 7th Baskerville technique, he left Seth amazed. The demon had no idea that the son of a sideline was capable of such a thing. But Vikir knew how demons thought. They always considered humans inferior beings and themselves invincible. But fooling the arrogant monster was easy. In the past life, the heroes who closed the demon gates were unable to find and destroy the 10 elite corpses. But now, before the fall has happened, these beings are hiding. The wizard asked the demon if he would feel even a drop of relief if he destroyed all of his friends and ruined their plan. Seth felt an invincible fear. He was frightened by an ordinary person. Is this even possible? Without answering, he dissolved into spikes of blood. This is in order to appear before the Vikir in his true form. His gaze flared maliciously. He hadn't expected this level of strength from this guy. But this is not the end. Demonic snakes surrounded Visir and began to attack relentlessly. One of them managed to bite. Seth smiled sinisterly. That was it. His power lay in his endless absorption of blood. This ability was directly related to this fluid. If Vikir loses all his blood, he will simply die. The Viker kept smiling, which annoyed Seth terribly. The demon couldn't understand what could be funny about this. However, it amused Visir how this monster, pleased with itself, had no idea what it was consuming. Suddenly, the demon's body seemed to freeze from the inside. He realized with horror. This blood was not ordinary at all. Meanwhile, Vikir demonstratively activated his regeneration, further fueling the opponent's panic. The demon could not understand how a mere human could possess such a diabolical ability, and a poison that harmed even demons. The only creatures that possessed such deadly poison were a cunning spider from the red and black mountains, a 9-headed snake, and a giant jellyfish from the bottom of the Black Sea. And now it became obvious. Madam's poison had even affected the 10 elite corpses. True, the spider herself seemed to be furious that her poison could not finish off her victim. But that was enough for Visir. By combining the 7th Baskerville technique with the powers of Wezerwool, he could already become a worthy opponent for the 10 elite corpses. Seth couldn't understand how this boy had become so strong. In his situation, there was only one way out, to escape and warn the other demons about the existence of this spy as quickly as possible. But Vikru was not given time to rest. He was surrounded by blood warriors. All of these creatures possessed the 6th Baskerville technique, which Seth himself had once learned. The demon had already decided he would kill Visir and then deal with everyone he loved. The situation was indeed getting worse, but Vikir was ready for that. He took out a black whistle, the same one that Seth, being a member of the Baskerville family, recognized immediately. A sharp, unbearable sound cut through space, spreading throughout the mountain. This time, Vikir took advantage of the second function of the whistle, mobilizing all the family's forces, and instantly, the entire mountain shuddered from a powerful impact. Hugo finally understood why his son had asked for that whistle. For the sake of killing a demon. The whole family froze, waiting for the order, and Vikir gave it to him, to tear the monster to pieces. All the hounds were informed of the demon's abilities, but were given strict orders, not to get a single scratch. It was this order that raised the fighting spirit of the soldiers. Meanwhile, Hugo was feeling heavy in his soul. How could he not notice that his son had turned into a demon? What was the state of the Baskerville family? The demon, seeing that the situation was hopeless, feverishly searched for a way to survive. He began to beg for a deal. If he is released, he will leave Seth's body. The vicar looked at him skeptically. Would anyone really believe this nonsense? But Andromalius understood perfectly well that he didn't need to convince everyone. One is enough. So he turned to Osiris. The monster pressed on the feelings of the older brother, reminding him that he would not allow the younger one to be killed. Seth's memories were accurate. Osiris was the kindest of the family. And now he had his last chance to save his brother. Osiris came closer, and the demon immediately began to pretend to be Seth. He spoke in his voice, assuring him that he was still alive. He began to ask for forgiveness for selling his soul to the demon, begging for a chance to make amends. But Osiris didn't even listen. Only the blade of the sword provided the answer. He was sad, but it was the only thing he could do for Seth. Vikir said that Osiris should not blame himself, but he understood that he was to blame for everything. If only he had taken better care of his brother in his youth. And suddenly, the hound screamed. The monster's head flew aside, and the demon, even in his last moments, laughed smugly. His brothers will definitely do much better. The wizard immediately understood. He couldn't hit from that distance. But then Hugo spoke up. A swordsman should not show his back. The demon shuddered. Where did this strange feeling come from? Why was he so scared? And suddenly he realized this is the instinct of the weaker against the stronger. Hugo swung his sword. One blow was enough to finish off the demon. It was Hugo's holy sword, Le Baskerville, the true power of the swordmaster. The very next day, all the inhabitants of the Baskerville territory learned the news about the sins of the second heir of the patriarch Seth. Of course, the truth about his demonic nature was hidden, but he was accused of numerous crimes. And this incident proved once again that the laws of the Baskerville family apply to everyone without exception. Osiris was responsible for the investigation, but in reality, a faithful assistant, Vikir, was working behind his back. Within a week, these two resolved all the important issues. Now that there was no trace of demons left in the Baskervilles, one could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But Vikir still ordered Cindy to find any information about other monsters in hiding. Osiris was proud of his younger brother. However, this incident delayed his sending to the academy. But Vikir didn't need to worry about family matters. That's what the patriarch decided. Osiris explained that the father was afraid that his youngest son would get involved in political games and power struggles. And surprisingly, recently the older brother began to understand his father. Hugo always genuinely cared about them. He just didn't know how to show it. The vicar turned his attention to his father. He carefully braided his granddaughter's braids, and the Pomeranian beamed with happiness. The protagonist once again looked at everything through the prism of the past. Once he lived in chains, seeing only Hugo's back and following it. That's why he didn't notice that the patriarch himself also had his own collar. But now he knew more. Experience, fate, despair. And most importantly, Hugo. It is this emotion that overwhelms you when you are freed from your shackles. And now Vikir realized the most important thing, that Hugo, whom he so wanted to take revenge on, no longer exists. The past no longer holds him back. He smiled contentedly and agreed to Osiris's offer to go to the academy. But I still couldn't let go of the past. His real revenge was just beginning. To those who were the cause of all the troubles from the very beginning? Finally, the day of the entrance ceremony to Colosseum Academy arrived. Students at the academy were divided into two classes. The Ice Squad were experts in swords, spears, bows, and anything that cut and stabbed. And the Fire Squad is exclusively made up of magicians. This year, several new names caught the eye at the entrance exams. Among them are Tudor of the Don Quixote family, a master swordsman, Bianca of the Usher family, an archery legend. Following them are the Baskerville triplets. And another star is the sorceress Sinclair, who took first place in the practical exam and second in the theory. But the leader of the theoretical group is an unknown guy named Vikir. The protagonist deliberately hid his last name so as not to attract unnecessary attention, so everyone considered him a commoner. He chose this one so that he could move freely around the academy without any unnecessary suspicion. At the center of all this academic turmoil is the academy's president, Dolores Quo Vadis. It was her that Vikiru should have avoided at all costs. Forgive me for the large portion of names and facts. Later, everything will come together into a single picture. Vikir was to live with Piggy, a boy he remembered well from his past life. Piggy was always kind and sincere. Once upon a time, when Vikir served in the triplets, it was this boy who constantly helped him. Then Piggy was bullied by his roommate, and that was just the beginning of his suffering. But this time things will be different. As soon as they met, Piggy started talking about the party for new students. The vicar listened but had no intention of leaving. The guy tried to lure him in every possible way, even telling him details about the most popular students. However, the protagonist stood his ground. But I managed to make sure that Piggy, as before, was a real pro at collecting information. He even admitted that he wanted to learn the same in difference. But Vikir did not idle. He had something important to do, a meeting with Ron. 4 years ago, he killed a neighboring family and sacrificed them for a contract with a demon. The Vicar cut off both his hands in one motion. He was interested in the very creature with whom he had made a deal. But Ron didn't have time to say anything. His head exploded, the third suspect to explode right in front of him. It was no coincidence. The blacklist of Vikir, compiled together with Cindy, contained the names of all who served demons and betrayed humanity. By the time the Empire fell, they were all to be destroyed. The fact that the 3 suspects exploded before he could kill them meant only one thing. It was a special ability of the demon, and this demon was hiding somewhere in the capital itself. In just one night, Vikir checked 29 suspects, and every time someone tried to say the demon's name, his head would explode. It seems that this was a special condition of the contract. No new information. But what else can we expect from day one? So the protagonist decided to return to the academy. Surprisingly, the party for newcomers was still going on. The wizard still looked in just in case. and immediately I ran into two acquaintances from the past. Even in his past life, he didn't know that these two were the same age. Heroes who, together with Camus Morgue, led humanity to victory. One of them is Tura, a descendant of the Don Quixote family, a genius of the sword and a human shield on the front lines. The other is Bianca, a legendary archer from the mystic family who has slain countless demons. Among the guests, Vikir recognized many faces. They had all once stood with him on the battlefields. But one question worried him most of all. Had Camus Morgue entered the academy? His thoughts were interrupted by an unpleasant scene. The older students forced Piggy to drink alcohol. If a guy can pull it off in one go, they won't force him to sing. There was no choice, so Piggy took a sip but immediately vomited it all onto the floor. They've already given him a derogatory nickname. Suddenly, Vikir appeared nearby and covered everything with his cloak. Last time, Piggy left the academy, unable to bear the humiliation. Then, he worked as a petty official, looking after his elderly parents. But later they met again, this time on the front lines. Piggy became one of the few volunteers. His strategic talent saved countless lives, and this respect was well-deserved. The protagonist calmly told his friend to go to the dormitory. He couldn't just stand by while he was being humiliated. The elders, of course, didn't like it. One of the students slapped Vikir on the cheek, grumbling that he was too cocky. Hugo's triplets were already seething. Someone had dared to touch their master. But even before they entered, Vikir forbade them from revealing his identity. Otherwise, it would be the end of them. Then, one of the older girls suggested a compromise. If the newcomer drank for two, they would be let go. The protagonist silently raised his glass and began to drink. The elders whispered among themselves. The glass contained the strongest fiery mixture. The vicar finished his drink, took Piggy and left. Suddenly someone grabbed his shoulder. And it was at this moment that the two strongest ones, Bianca and Tura, felt a terrible energy. The vicar, with quiet but stern composure, asked what else they wanted from him. There was no answer. Hugo's triplets were thrilled. The scene was legendary. Those two wrote it all off. But Sinclair understood immediately that she had found a truly worthy person. At the academy, the Ice and Fire squads attended lectures together. This created a special environment where the elite constantly competed with each other. The professor of battle theory has just finished a lecture on the culture of barbarian tribes. His question was simple. Where could the stronghold of these tribes be located? Tudor had a hard time with theory. Bianca was also not distinguished by any special knowledge. But Sinclair could answer any question, clearly and confidently, without a doubt. While she was talking about tribal customs, Vikir's thoughts were far away. The horrors of the night came back to his eyes. 29 bodies, each one imbued with demons, each one with an exploding face. If this was indeed the ability of one of the 10 elite corpses, then he already knew where they could be hiding. But his thoughts were interrupted by Piggy. The professor became angry, deciding that the student had fallen asleep right during the first lecture. The vicar calmly replied that he had not dozed off. But this only made the teacher even more mad. He was sure that a real psycho had entered the academy. So I decided to teach the impudent a lesson. If the answer is wrong, the entire squad will lose points. The question concerned the stronghold of the mysterious Balak tribe, the least known about it. But Vikir gave a perfectly precise, detailed answer. The professor froze. What is this? A theory that has not yet been confirmed by the scientific community. It seems that the student who scored the highest score on the theory exam was sitting in front of him. Tudor, looking at such smart people, made his fists itch. He wondered if this bookworm would show anything in practice. Rugby was a popular game at the academy, only without the manipulation of mana and weapons. And it was in this game that Tudor was the star. He didn't want to come face to face with the Baskerville monsters, so he bypassed the triplets. And then I came across Visir. I decided to make fun of him a little. Let's see how this nerd holds up. But as soon as he hit it, he flew away and lost consciousness, just in an instant. Vikir understood that it looked suspicious. Therefore, without hesitation, he also pretended to be the victim. Tudor was stunned. He didn't understand what had just happened. I remembered one thing. I wanted to bump into that nerd with my shoulder. And now I was sure that I needed to check my theory again. Even the girls in the stands noticed that the fencer was not running towards the ball, but straight at Vikir. This time the Baskerville triplets tried to stop him, but in vain. Tudor used the Azure Spear family's signature running technique. The last thing he saw before darkness fell was Vikir's calm, completely unmoved face. He woke up after the game. Standing above him was a giant, his friend Sancho, who had pulled him off the field. Sancho understood his friend well. Something was wrong with this newcomer, and this time he will figure it out himself. Sancho Barataria, a member of the Northern Trade Guild Association, was known for his incredible physical strength. He didn't play rugby on principle, but after his friend was knocked out of the match for the second time, he made an exception. The triplets were already on full combat duty, but Sancho, like a bolt from the blue, easily scattered all three, and now he was flying straight towards Vikir. I wanted to know if this nerd could withstand a real blow. However, as soon as I touched it, it was as if I had crashed into a mountain. He stood stunned, not believing his own eyes. But Vikir understood that he had to play to the situation, so he pretended to be really hurt and fell to the ground. Sancho stood in shock, and the triplets took advantage of this. Victory was definitely theirs. Water was poured over Vikir's head to cool him down, and Sancho declared, "The secret hero who brought victory should not stand aside." Tudor jokingly asked to be at least a little happy. After all, he had forced him to retreat. But what struck Sancho most was the state of Vikir's body. It was like a mountain. For a second it seemed to him that he was using mana. But he insisted, "No offense, he is a commoner." The protagonist took off his glasses while resting and didn't even suspect it. That from this moment on, the academy will cease to be just a place of study. A real adventure will begin. That same evening, the Nighthound came across a strange creature. An eerie stench and waves of dark energy permeated the air. Was it one of the elite corpses? The protagonist's new enemy really turned out to be extremely strong. His aura was expert level, and the technique he used was Quo Vadis. It clearly indicated that the person in front of Vikir was not an elite corpse. So who was it? The protagonist thought with anxiety. Had the demon really infiltrated a religious country? And if he can destroy this servant, then perhaps he will finally face the demon himself. Vikir hasn't given vent to his emotions for a long time, and now it seems like it's time to have some fun. His blows were precise, sharp, and powerful. Even when the demon's servant tried to escape, Vikir kept him in sight, not giving him a chance. The creature was mortally wounded. He noticed a name carved on her body. The protagonist wondered in surprise who turned a Phoebo into such a monster. But it was obvious. The demon controlled his minions down to the smallest detail. Even their speech was under his influence. However, not everything can be solved with words. And Vikir knew methods more effective than conversations, those that he liked much more. Among the ruins, the hero came across another man, a poison seller. This time, Vikir wanted to know absolutely everything. But they weren't alone. Someone was already following them. The merchant agreed to talk and even managed to shout about the manager's office and the safe, but it was too late. A demonic force suddenly permeated the space. The vicar sensed her instantly. And the man who just wanted to help turned into something strange. No, into a real bomb. And it was already exploding. Law enforcement officers heard the explosion. Among them was Saint Dolores, and together they immediately rushed to the scene. But this was definitely not an ordinary incident. The traces of the battle even reached the shelter. The question arose, what evil were they fighting there? Dolores found something unexpected. She was clearly stunned by this and she immediately hid the find. But there was no doubt. This mask belonged to the Nighthound. The explosion helped a Phoebo cover his tracks. The only thing left for Visa is the ledger from the safe of the shelter director. It contained horrific details, addresses and details of children who were being used as food for demons. But most importantly, Vikir recognized the silhouette of the person he had seen on the roof last night. It was definitely an academy student, and maybe one of the elite corpses. But while someone was hiding in the shadows, everything at the academy revolved around someone else. The new issue of the famous Capital's newspaper was already on its way. It was published by the team of the newspaper club Lucion, and it was a seriously influential project. The club was headed by St. Dolores, a third-year student with an impeccable reputation and iron charisma. Now she welcomed the newcomers. I'll tell you briefly, most of you are already familiar with it. Tudor came because he wants to be the first everywhere. Sancho, because he's tired of being perceived as just muscles. Sinclair saw the club as a path to power. Bianca liked their direct style of thinking. And Piggy was just getting a kick out of analyzing the information. The club was a perfect fit for him. The witch simply followed her friend. Although in reality he understood perfectly well. Here he would be able to obtain the data he needed. The only thing he didn't like was Dolores's presence. But the peace didn't last long. Everyone immediately recognized Vikir. Anna, Sviatoya's colleague, had written an entire article about him the day before. A hot rookie who had knocked out Tudor in a rugby match. But journalists are not sitting idle. The newcomers were given their first assignment. Write an article about the explosion and the burned shelter. The first step was the headline. But the newcomers didn't have much of an idea. All the options sounded either too gloomy or banal. And then Dolores muttered softly, "Nighthound." It was this mask that she found at the scene of the explosion. Its owner is the same silent stranger. Humble, poor, but willing to risk his life for the sake of others. She believed the hound stole the saint's tear for a reason. Even if he was a criminal, he had a reason. Anna agreed. Nighthound sounded strong. Mystical, and a little scary, just what you need. Only then did Dolores realize she had said it out loud. Tudor looked at Visir and asked what he thought. The protagonist pretended not to care. But internally, I had already decided. This hound is definitely not a hero and therefore a thief. Suddenly, Dolores raised her head and sharply asked where Vitir got such confidence from. The wizard could not clearly explain why he was so sure. Dolores immediately reminded them that as journalists, they should only operate with verified facts. After all, one thoughtless word can ruin someone's life. Therefore, blaming the hound for the explosion and the death of the children is too much. Sviata remained neutral, even though the destroyed shelter had a connection to her family. But then she was urgently called by one of the teachers. He needed a concrete answer. Goncha is guilty, period. And he wanted the article to come out tomorrow with this message. But Dolores is not one to give up easily. She went to negotiate. And at that moment, she looked like a true queen. This is exactly how Vikir remembered her in her past life, when she led the army to the front. He was afraid that the saint would perceive the hound's action as evil. But this girl only wanted the truth. Meanwhile, life at the academy continued on its course. Every morning, they got up at 6. The siren sounded and everyone went outside. There, an instructor and a short jog awaited them. After charging free time, 4 friends were just walking around the area. Tudor, Sancho, and Piggy were making plans for the weekend. They wanted to escape to the city and relax a bit. But Vikir had to work, mandatory volunteering. One of the teachers clearly disliked him and would nag him for any reason. Vikir asked his comrades to leave without him, but they didn't even hesitate. They decided that volunteering also sounded cool, and they wouldn't abandon their friend. Tudor couldn't help but notice how he was drawn to Visir, as if he were an older brother. Calm, confident, inner strength, Vikir already looked like a true leader. And it was these boys who would later become heroes, who first decided to side with him. Then suddenly, everything was spoiled by a pungent stench. The vicar immediately understood who he was dealing with. He asked Piggy who this guy was. It turned out to be Bane, a second-year student. He was considered the most handsome boy in the academy. Vikir even had a thought to attack, but it was too risky, especially when friends are around. He abruptly said he felt sick and left. His thoughts revolved around Bane, and that's exactly why he didn't notice Dolores crashing into him from the acceleration. The poor thing fell down the steps and felt as if she had hit a stone wall. And this wall didn't even move. Who was this Vika? Meanwhile, Bane himself took the girls to a secluded place. He said he wanted to share something personal. They say some strange guy has appeared who is constantly clinging to him. Because of him, he couldn't even eat normally. And it seems this guy already guessed that Bane was from the academy. The girls were moved to assure him that they would always support him. But it was too late. The creature had already begun to devour its victims, slowly, methodically. Bane had no doubt that mysterious boy in the plague mask was definitely involved in Andromalius's death. Now a little more about the ninth corpse, Dantalion. He had a whole network of servants who gathered information about the plague doctor, the same stranger who suddenly began interfering in his affairs. After the explosion, he acted much more cautiously, but he still remained a threat. Dantalion's specialty was his collection of faces. He literally collected them like others collect trophies. And now he ordered his slaves to comb the city and track down the plague doctor. Because of his actions, the 10th corpse died, and the opening of the gate had to be postponed. And this annoyed the demon. He urgently needed to vent his irritation somewhere. Soon Dantalion met with Dolores. This time it bore the face of Sir Quitely, the head of a side branch of the Quo Vadis family. The saint could not stand this man. He profited from the sins of the rich, selling them purification for big money. And such people, as Dolores said, no God will save them. Kvitli only coldly replied that he was acting in accordance with church doctrines. That was the end of their conversation. But inside, Dantalion could barely contain himself. He desperately wanted to add Dolores's face to his collection. For him, she was the most beautiful thing in this world. And he dreamed of seeing her gaze, full of despair, at the moment when the world would turn upside down. That's why he needed to open the gate as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Vikir reached the shelter. Cindy calculated this location by analyzing the records left by the first demon in Seth's body. But the sanctuary belonged to the holy family of Quo Vadis, which meant that demons had already infiltrated all the key clans. For Vikir, it was a chance to better study his comrades and the location itself. But the situation was far from simple. This shelter was on a completely different level, the largest in the capital. Its director had considerable weight in church circles and was a fairly influential figure. Visa's friends knew about the long-standing conflict between Quitely and Dolores over differences in faith. The protagonist himself only thought about one thing. As soon as he met the director, everything would fall into place. But first, getting to know the children with whom the volunteers will spend the next 10 days. Bianca and Sinclair standing next to them. It seems that the girls have also decided to join the volunteering. Sinclair immediately approached Visser, wanting to get to know him better. She almost burst with happiness when the guy agreed. But, as it turned out, everything was a little more complicated. Piggy said that this blonde had specifically arranged everything so that she could be with Visser. The protagonist understood that now he had to be more careful with Sinclair. Finally, it was time to meet the kids. Vikir immediately stood out from the others. The children were simply afraid to approach him. Only one girl suddenly ran out of the hall and he quietly followed. He told her that he didn't like crowds either, because then people might think there was something wrong with him. He wondered why this little one had run away. But even these words didn't melt her heart. Here Vikir remembered Ayan's advice. You should smile more often. So he softly repeated her name and smiled sincerely. Perry blushed to the very ears and ran away again. The protagonist just thought, is he really that scary? Dolores was surprised by this warm side of Visser. He usually seemed cold. She explained that Perry's heart was broken. She became withdrawn from grief and eventually lost her voice. At first, volunteers tried to be there for her, but then, due to their busy schedules, they simply disappeared. Maybe she was just tired of saying goodbye. And then Vikir saw something that made his heart sink. He abruptly covered Dolores's mouth with his hand. Kvitli was walking down the corridor, talking to some rich man about cleansing. The vicar silently prayed that the saint would not make a sound. He didn't need anything to recognize the same stench that was in the academy. And that meant only one thing. One of the 10 elite corpses stood before them. Dolores could no longer tolerate this spying cover-up. But what they feared most happened. They were exposed. The students, of course, were scared. They were found completely unexpectedly. But Vikir was frightened by something completely different. The same stench that came from the demon's personal guard. Kvitli was genuinely surprised to see St. Dolores in such a place. And the demon, approaching Vikir, immediately realized that the guy was a volunteer. Behind his dark glasses, he didn't notice at first how attractive his face was. And I've almost decided to add this young man to my collection. But he was busy now. Dolores was seething with rage and immediately lashed out at Visser, demanding an explanation. He dryly apologized and assured me that something like this would never happen again. The saint was shocked. It was the first time she had seen him so irritated. But this scene brought an important result. Now Vikir knew that Kvitli always went with a guard. And one of the guards was the same one he had seen during the explosion. His scent left no doubt. It was a Phoebo, and therefore the other guards are also of a high level. If he wants to get to Kvitli, he will first have to eliminate 4 guards. For now, it's volunteer work. Vikir was doing monotonous work so he could calmly think about the plan. And his friends were proud of him and followed his example. All the children were having a carefree time, except Perry. She kept to herself, and Vikir couldn't ignore it. He brought a ball, a favorite toy of the children of the Balak tribe. But it wasn't exactly a ball. It looked like Madame Octopus's egg was about to hatch. But Perry was happy, and that was the main thing. Sinclair was watching Visser at this moment. She had no doubt that he was really good. That's why she came. She wanted to be closer to him. But their warm scene was suddenly interrupted by a nuisance. A ball, or rather a spider egg, fell into the sewage. The wizard asked Perry not to worry, but the girl was almost crying. At that moment, Dolores also thought about Visser. Her first impression was not the best at all. Too harsh, closed. But after talking to other students, she realized that he helped wherever needed. He was respected, so the problem was only her bias. Maybe he even found out about her conflict with Kvitli and covered her up. This deserved an apology. But just as she was about to do so, she encountered a rather unexpected scene. After undressing, Vikir jumped into the sewage without hesitation. A few seconds passed and the ball was found. Peri had nothing more to blame herself for. The girl stood in shock. But most of all, Peri herself. Finally, the last day of volunteer work arrived. During this time, Vikir and Peri became noticeably closer. The girl was grateful that he was always there, supporting and protecting her. She was only worried about one thing. Would they meet again? But for a demon hunter, the future is too hazy. He couldn't make any promises. And yet, he whispered quietly that he would definitely return, if tomorrow came for him. These words made Peri smile from ear to ear. Kvitli himself appeared at the farewell ceremony. As always, the man skillfully played on emotions, talking about poor children, forcing those present to believe every word. But this time he was accompanied by all 4 guards. It became clear. Setting up an ambush would be more difficult than expected. But Vikir wasn't going to wait any longer. The hunt for the elite corpse would begin tonight. And yet something else worried him. Sinclair, her behavior aroused suspicion. At the academy, she seemed simple and friendly. But Vikir remembered well. In a past life, she had been a legend of the Ice Squad. First in both final exams. But immediately after graduation, she disappeared without a trace. And never appeared again. Meanwhile, the children were allowed to say goodbye to the volunteers. But Peri was nowhere to be seen. The wizard walked around the entire yard, but in vain. Worried, he went to Dolores. When Sviata saw him, she immediately remembered all the bright moments she associated with this cold but genuine guy. She was also surprised by Peri's absence. She had seen her in a good mood earlier in the morning. Everything came together in Vikir's head. This is the work of a demon. Of Kvitli's guards were given a special task to guard the perimeter around their master. But Vikir seized the moment and approached Efebo. His question was strange, unexpected, but it was impossible to get an answer. The servants had no right to speak, so Vikir decided not to waste time. Efebo's head instantly crumbled, as if it had turned into a piece of cloth. The witch couldn't believe her eyes. The demon servant he killed bore a painful resemblance to Pedro from the Quo Vadis family. And although the face had some differences, the resemblance was striking. The protagonist remembered how in a past life, Pedro talked about his younger brother who disappeared during isolated training. So it is quite likely that the demon's other servants were once familiar to him. At that moment, the creatures rushed at him with an attack. The battle turned out to be difficult. Meanwhile, Dolores whispered prayers to the Almighty. But her thoughts stubbornly returned to one image, Vikir. She tried to calm herself down, saying it was just a younger comrade. But something about him, and about the Night Hound, sat uneasily in her mind. Suddenly, the adjacent corridor shook with explosions. It was the Night Hound who engaged in battle with the guards of Blossom. Everything happened so quickly that Dolores didn't have time to realize what was happening. The girl distracted him for a moment, and he missed the shot. She shouted at the guards to stop this nonsense, but it didn't stop them. Only Vikir, remaining on his feet, asked her to step aside and took all the blows upon himself. Dolores could not hide her excitement over the hound's injury. But Vikir quickly dealt with his enemies. And as soon as the battle ended, the faces of the killed changed. They no longer looked like the guards. He explained it was an undead masquerading as other personalities. One of the opponents is the same officer who was with Vikir on the day of his disappearance. This warrior avoided problems in his own family because he went on isolated training. It was a similar story with Seth. And if the Morg triplets weren't lying, then... Is she really here too? Future legend, Camus Morg. Dolores was amazed. The Night Hound had saved her again. She also served God and could destroy the undead, but Vikir asked her to leave. He needed to check something. In front of him stood a girl with long red hair. Magic, at least of the Sixth Circle. Even for the Morg family, such strength at a young age was a great rarity. Is that really her? In a past life, Camus had a warm relationship with her uncle. If he hadn't just approached her then, if I hadn't used it for my own purposes, if his actions have now ruined her path again, the path of the heroine Camus Morg, then what harm has he done? The vizier finally got close to the enemy. He violently ripped the mask off his face, and without hesitation, he cut off his head. Dolores immediately rushed to help Hound. She didn't understand if this girl was familiar to him. Fortunately, he was simply mistaken. But Dolores' soul was filled with a question. Why did he fight until his last breath? The witch replied, it was a demon hunt. Amazed, she watched silently as he collected the servants' masks. And suddenly, a voice came from the darkness, demanding the return of the relic. The masks, they say, were borrowed from a very evil lady. The voice undoubtedly belonged to Kvitla. A mouth that had grown on the body of one of the servants ominously declared that the saint now knew everything. Dolores couldn't stand it anymore. She began to pray with all sincerity. God's power destroyed the terrible creature in an instant. But that was just the beginning. The blow pierced Visa through and through. The demon wondered if the saint was really going to fight him. Young, inexperienced, with a modest swordsman as a partner. Who is she trying to fool? But even if she was just trying to be brave, he wouldn't believe it. And yet the demon was satisfied. The saint was finally in his hands. And Vakir realized something important. This demon is a coward. He does not fight alone, but is covered by servants. So the hero easily healed his wounds and, smiling, asked how his acting was. The demon just sighed and told the damned actor to call him Dantalion. Surprisingly, even such a blow to the head did not kill the creature. Vakir understood perfectly well that Dantalion was included in the 10 elite corpses for a reason. This demon collected faces, and with them, lives, memories, emotions. And until this entire collection is destroyed, it will be impossible to kill him. But Vakir was ruthless, and he intended to do just that. A woman's body lay on the floor, but another silhouette was already emerging from it. This time, a man. Dantalion skillfully played on emotions, changing his face to throw his enemy off balance. And once he succeeded. He placed one of the faces in Vakir's hand. He called it a gift. The hero felt as if he was electrocuted, and other people's memories, pain and traumas flooded into his consciousness. Vakir's memory began to merge with the stranger's personality, blurring the line between him and someone else. The protagonist acted instantly. He cut off his hand. And the power of the salamander immediately began healing, returning the body to its usual state. Now the demon understood why Andromalius had lost. It will not be possible to fight such an enemy head-on, so he targeted Dolores. He saw that the saints were the Nighthound's weak spot. She herself asked not to worry about her, but Vakir could not afford to lose the person who was the pillar of the heroes. This battle was too brutal. If this is always the case, the Hound will continue to fight alone. Dolores had to find the determination within herself, but fear paralyzed her. And yet, she had no right to leave him alone. Dantalion tried to break her faith, intimidate her, and crush her from within. Meanwhile, Vakir continued to fight. In the crowd of faces, he suddenly recognized Perry. And this brief, almost imperceptible weakness became fatal. The wizard found himself in a strange, eerie space. A whole group of children was sitting in front of him. The only thing he remembered was how Dantalion's power completely consumed him. It seems these children suffered the same fate. They were all swallowed by a demon. Horror slowly crept under his skin. The trauma, fear, and painful memories of the victims flooded through him. But Vakir was not going to stop. He had a goal, to find Perry. Meanwhile, Dolores also found herself inside this cruel illusion. She understood. All these children were just fragments of souls, torn apart and imprisoned in darkness. The very thought of it made her sick. Dantalion watched her. His words rang out like poison. They said that even a saint is not pure. She just got lucky with a blessing. In her soul, she is powerless and weak. And without her help, he wouldn't have been able to lock the swordsman in this dungeon. Dolores agreed. Everything she said was true. But she added, people have the power of faith. And this faith does not fade, even when the world around them is broken. Dantalion was stunned. Where did this divine power come from? Has she not succumbed to defilement? On the contrary, Dolores finally saw how indecisive she had been before. But now, no. She won't let the Nighthound fight alone. The saint must use everything she is capable of. The demon already sensed danger. If she really activates her power, there's no escape for him. And indeed, the light began to cleanse the prisoners of the dungeon. One by one, the souls of the children went to Dolores. She sobbed, regretting that she had not been able to help them sooner. Meanwhile, Visa found Perry. As he walked towards her, he asked himself the question, why did he want to see her so much? And now he finally knew the answer. He said he spent the last few years chasing demons. But only now, seeing her smile, did he understand. The point was to create a world where children like her could laugh next to him. Divine light flooded the dungeon. The vicar quietly apologized for not being able to protect her. Perry, in tears, asked if he had really come to see her. She was scared, very scared. The vicar hugged her tightly. He promised he wouldn't forgive the one who made her cry. Dantalion was shocked. Was the saint really that strong? Maybe she had truly awakened her power? One thing was striking. Dolores had purified all the souls in his underworld, and Vikir felt something incredible next to her. Her divine power enhanced his aura. He reached a new level. Dantalian felt his heart clench in fear. Did this really happen? Did this swordsman become a master? The protagonist just looked at him and threw a warning. Don't even dream of an easy death. Dolores felt the pain of every child who was sacrificed. All these emotions merged with the Nighthound's heart. Her father once said, "Saint will only awaken when she finds a soulmate." And now she has found it. Dolores decided to give all her divine power to the Vicar. That is why the moment of awakening has come. Vikir had finally reached a level that others could only dream of. He became the Swordmaster. The protagonist went on the offensive. His blow after blow destroyed all the demons' faces. Dantalian began to panic. Was it really going to end like this? He was ordered to gather mana to open the gate to the demon world. He was convinced that he was about to conquer humanity. But now, some person has ruined all his plans. The demon decided to go all in, to kill the hound at the cost of his own life. He shouted that he still had one face left. Dolores was nervous. It seemed that they might not be able to withstand it, and the entire shelter would simply shatter into pieces. But Vikir was calm. Now he could definitely do what had previously been only a dream. The protagonist used the technique of Patriarch Hugo. It was a decisive blow. The ninth demon, Dantalian, was destroyed, and the starry sky that same evening illuminated the entire capital. Panic began in the Empire. After all, the main suspect in the attack on the Quo Vadis family was the Nighthound. But Dolores was not afraid. She knew the whole truth. Even before the scandal started, Sviatya apologized to Pedro for what was about to happen. She came out to reporters to make a formal statement. That same night, the Hound revealed to her the dark truth about the Holy Family. And Dolores decided not to remain silent. She told about all the sins, about how the cleanup project let crimes go for money, how the greatest sinners bought salvation for themselves. Even fear of her father could not stop her. From that moment on, the forgiveness of sins for a price was declared blasphemy. She swore that something like this would never happen again in the Quo Vadis family. The vizier saw her determination and was proud. Her heart was pure and strong. Now there were only 8 elite corps left, and he knew exactly how it would end. In the finale of his journey, Vikir will create a world in which children like Perry can live peacefully and laugh. He only hoped that this little girl had finally found her peace. Finally, Vikir got some quiet time to be alone with himself. His rank of Swordmaster, gained through the Saint's divine blessing, gradually dropped to the level of a high-class expert. But even so, he learned something truly useful from the battle against Dantalian's minions. All those leather bags he had seen before merged into a huge mask. If Vikir was not mistaken, it was the Mask of Degeneration, an artifact equal in power to the demon sword of Veselvul. Even in a past life, he had read that this relic strengthens the bearer in proportion to the number of fratricides. Vikir decided to try it on to check for side effects. His health and aura, lost in the last battle, were instantly restored. But something definitely went wrong. Everything around him became gigantic, black and white. And only then did he realize he had become a dog. If he doesn't return to human form, problems will be inevitable. Fortunately, the mask came off easily as soon as he wanted it to. It looks like the artifact will still be very useful. But the peace did not last long. The hero was suddenly seized by an unsettling fear. He remembered Madame's egg. It cracked, and this meant that a creature that even demons feared was about to be born. But instead of a nightmare, a tiny, shaggy ball hatched from the egg. The little spider looked so defenseless, it was almost funny. One thing was clear. He was insanely hungry. But unlike his mother, he didn't like meat. And so, Vikir unexpectedly obtained an S-class monster from the dense forest, and now set out to find food for it. On the way, he came across a rather unpleasant scene. Piggy was surrounded by academy students and began to insult them. The loudest among them was Grenouille of the Fire Troop, a descendant of the Leviathan clan. He was annoyed by the presence of a commoner in the academy. He shouted that people like Piggy had no place there, and that his level was just a reflection of who he was hanging out with. These words angered Piggy. He was not going to allow his friends to be insulted. Grenouille ordered him to be arrested, but nothing happened. On the contrary, Tudor appeared before Piggy, anxiously asking if he was okay. Sancho was seething with anger. They said they had chosen the wrong guy for the fight. And at that moment, Vizier silently approached and helped Piggy to her feet. Grenouille almost lost control of his rage, and the others finally understood what had made this arrogant rooster so angry all this time. Their anger grew exponentially. Now they were ready to tear apart anyone who dared to touch one of them. Grenouille broke down and shouted that losers always look for excuses. Enraged, he attacked the four friends, filling the air around him with thick smoke that resembled a paralytic poison. But suddenly, little Madam started sniffing, and she simply sucked all the poison straight into her mouth as if it were her favorite dish. Within seconds, the air became crystal clear. It was time to calmly talk to the attacker. Tutor offered a simple yet tough deal. Compete in midterm exams. The winner takes the glory, and the loser will run through the academy without clothes. Both sides accepted the bet. The exam consisted of 3 stages: a team defense test, an individual attack test, and a theoretical test. This time, the team stage kicked off. A magical dungeon with illusory monsters was created in the arena. Teams of 4 had to hold the defense as long as possible while these creatures were closing in on them. The protective charms on the students absorbed some of the damage, but not all. Surviving and holding on was the main thing. So far, the best result belongs to the third-year team. The Dolores group was able to hold out for 58 minutes. Meanwhile, Tudor, Sancho, Piggy, and Bianca were building their own strategy. The task was clear: provide maximum protection for Bianca so that she could shoot enemies with her bow. But Vakir had a separate team, and he, like a true strategist, ordered his fighters to go completely crazy so as not to even lift a finger himself. All this is to avoid attracting too much attention. Hugo's triplets were over the moon with happiness. They had finally received their first assignment from their master, and they were ready to give it their all. Grenouille's team had a serious trump card. They cunningly decided to use Sinclair's abilities to take first place among all first-year students. Finally, the long-awaited exams began. The freshmen entered the arena, and the show was just beginning. Grenouille and his team were the first to enter the arena. Sinclair immediately began to shine. She acted precisely, confidently, and without unnecessary movements. Vika watched with interest as she worked as a team, and now he understood why she was called the best student. But one thing bothered him. Why had he never heard of her in his past life? Their team lasted 19 minutes and 55 seconds in the arena, a new record. Grenouille was already happy in advance, imagining his rivals walking around the academy without clothes. Next came the Wickerman and the Baskerville triplets. His friends wished him luck, but the 3 of them were already on a war wave. Bianca immediately noticed how skillfully Vakir wielded a bow. Piggy couldn't help but say that he was the best shooter in the ice squad. And indeed, the arrows flew with lightning speed. Bianca even had a strange feeling that there was something wrong with all of this. Visa's body was restraining itself, even though it was eager to show its true strength. But the guy wasn't going to attract attention. But he decided to use this chance for little Madam. Upon learning that there would be poisonous ants among the monsters, he realized the spider would get a royal dinner. And he was not mistaken. He immediately arranged a feast for himself right in the middle of the arena. As a result, their time turned out to be exactly the same as Grenouille's team's. The triplets were almost regretting out loud that they had not been able to bring their master to first place. Meanwhile, Tudor's team entered the arena. Their strategy was clear: to hold out as long as possible while everyone else gave up their positions. Tudor and Sancho fought on the front lines. Bianca supported from the rear, and Piggy controlled the situation, issuing orders like a true commander. But despite all the coherence, there was a feeling that something was missing. The witch immediately realized that his spider was missing. Meanwhile, little Madam sat right in the middle of the battlefield, and she slowly swallowed the poison. Complete harmony. The wizard quickly guessed that the spider had jumped into the arena on its own as soon as their exam was over. And it seems like he's already grown up a bit. However, the hero could not change anything. The battle of the other group had already started. All that remained was to hope that everything would go smoothly without any disasters. Fortunately, Tudor's team performed brilliantly. Thanks to Piggy, their attacks were precise and economical. No unnecessary movement. The guy was beaming with joy, because he wasn't just not in the way, but was actually helping. And with such a well-coordinated team, a new record seemed quite achievable. The result is another draw. 19 minutes 55 seconds. But the main thing is that the bet remains valid, and no one will have to walk around the academy naked. Dolores was pleased. The club had not let her down. Suddenly, the system announced the start of the second round. Everyone froze. No one expected anything to continue. The monsters attacked the students again. Sancho and Tudor immediately understood. The protective magic no longer worked. Now every blow was real. They had only one thing left to do, to hold out until the elders arrived. Meanwhile, panic broke out in the control room. Dolores rushed to the teachers, but they only waved their hands. Without Professor Sadie, they were powerless, and she should have been forgiven. Vikir overheard all this and instantly realized how serious the situation had become. Besides, the poisonous fog has already filled the arena. If we delay, there will be no one to save. Then he noticed the narrow ventilation passages, the ones used for air circulation. If you try, you can climb there. And inside the arena, things were bad. Piggy fainted, and a giant monster was approaching Tudor, Bianca, and Sancho. Bianca had already resigned herself to it. She didn't believe that her end would come like that, in the middle of training. But suddenly there was a powerful blow. Someone rushed forward and crashed into the monster. Bianca couldn't believe her eyes. Where did he come from? And Vikir calmly said that nothing would happen to them. The Baskerville family motto was simple. Beasts that cannot be tamed must be destroyed. Little Madame Visir would teach her a lesson later, but for now, she had to eat all the poison and provide protection for the others. Meanwhile, the hero himself set out to deal with the monsters. But under the dome, all the vital signs and combat skills of the students were displayed. So Wicker had to hide his true identity, a swordsman. And that wasn't a problem for him. Well-aimed shots, a few powerful blows, and not even a trace of the monster ants remained. The only remaining threat was the Ant General. His level was completely different, so he had to be destroyed without fail. Meanwhile, the teachers have already reported that all the students are fine, and the main monster has been destroyed. One of the professors, who disliked Vikir, was simply stunned. No student at the academy had yet been able to defeat the Ant General. And finally, Professor Sadie was found. It turned out that this unruly woman simply got drunk at a bar and started a fight. After that, the incident was quickly resolved, and the center of attention was none other than the protagonist himself. Dolores was amazed. To avoid unnecessary questions, Vikir simply pretended to be unconscious. But that didn't stop the press. The newspapers immediately exploded with articles about the new freshman star. Everyone wanted to know who this mysterious hottie was. The protagonist could not have imagined that his quiet student life would turn into a real headache. But the main thing is that all the heroes remained alive. Soon it was time for another report from Cindy. She briefly outlined the main points. It will take her a month to study elite corpses, which means Vikiru needs to urgently upgrade her skills. Nighthound imitators have also appeared, and if they cross the line, they will have to be dealt with. Another interesting point is that among the Academy's students, there is a person of royal blood. This information could have been very useful. Suddenly a phrase was heard. Female voice. Sinclair did not expect to meet the hero of the Academy in such a place and at such a time. Apparently, this is what they call fate. Sinclair was a real talent, easily holding on to second place in the fire squad. But Wicker couldn't imagine what she was doing on the roof at such a time. It turned out that she came there when she was sad, just to look at the stars. She even thought she was worried. What if she wouldn't see him again next time? And what's interesting is that this girl was also hiding something. Before going back in time, she looked like an ordinary simpleton. But after the academy, she completely disappeared from the public sphere, cutting off all ties with the world. If she was just pretending to be a simpleton, then it turns out that she is the royal person Cindy mentioned. Meanwhile, the next exam started at the academy, on a fence. Unlike the defense test, this one assessed individual combat skills. The format is a one-on-one fight between a student and a professor. The goal is to give students the experience of a real fight with a much stronger opponent. This approach had one caveat. Each professor could only evaluate 50 students. Therefore, the results directly depended on the style and preferences of the particular teacher. Tudor and Bianca did brilliantly. Even if Grenouille and Tudor scored the same points, the descendant of the Leviathan clan was clearly ahead of Don Quixote in theory. Bianca tried to calm her friend down, because they were lucky. Their examiner was Professor Morgue. But most students will get Professor Sadi. This woman had a reputation as an eccentric drunkard whom even older students avoided. At the same time, she was one of the best hunters of dangerous criminals, and it was for this that she received the title of professor. Tudor really hoped that their strong and talented friends would not be harmed. Bianca was worried for a reason. There were rumors that Professor Sadie could not stand gifted students from influential families. Because of her envy, she allegedly ruined other people's talents. Sadie really turned out to be a bit crazy. She even allowed herself to drink alcohol during exams. without shame, right in front of the students. The testing finally began, and the first victim was Sancho. The boy calmly entered the arena, not a drop of fear, because he believed that the will of a true warrior could not be broken. But it seems that it was this phrase that Sadie took as a challenge. What she did shocked everyone. She mercilessly attacked Sancho, breaking his defenses, and, as she herself commented, breaking his will. And this automatically meant failure. Sinclair couldn't believe what she was seeing. Sadie beat Sancho so brutally that he lost consciousness. And in justification, she simply quoted the first rector of the academy. They say, students should gain experience in a real battle. Then she turned to Sinclair with a sarcastic comment. Would the second place of the Ice Squad also be whining on the battlefield? The vicar tried to convince Sinclair not to leave. Running away from the one who hurt her friend? Not even an option for Sinclair. The fight began. Sinclair immediately showed the maximum of his strength. Sadie was surprised. It was rare to see such a high-class spell cast by such a young student. But here's the question. Has Sinclair had any experience with someone forcibly breaking her spell? The mana rollback in this case was unbearably painful. She even fell to the ground from the strong impact. Sadie, as if nothing had happened, also coldly commented, if the girl was unlucky, she would never be able to use magic again. After that, Piggy was called into the arena. But I'm sorry, I don't feel like describing how this good-natured boy was beaten. I'll just say one thing. Vikir was seething with anger. Then he himself challenged himself to be next. Sadie was already rubbing her hands, anticipating how she would break the academy's strongest student. But Vikir was already aiming. His arrow flew straight into her eye without hesitation. When the scream went up, he just shrugged as if he was aiming at the golem. But look, the arrow somehow changed direction. And then he calmly asked if the professor was okay. Professor Morg instantly came running to the noise. Seeing the situation, he just sighed heavily. Had Sadie really put on her favorite show again? But as soon as he looked at the arena, even he was stunned. The students lay unconscious, and Sadie herself was injured. Tudor rushed to his beaten friends, and Morg, although he had seen Sadie bend the stick more than once, witnessed for the first time that she herself got what she deserved. It seems that karma does exist. Sadie did not forget this. She made it clear that she would meet with Vikir again. But for now, the exam is over, and normal everyday life has returned to the academy. However, the peace was only on the surface. President Dolores was studying the newspaper intently, her brow furrowed. Vikir noticed this immediately. In the latest issue, news about the Nighthound surfaced again. There were attacks on important objects in the capital, and she was declared the culprit without any evidence. The fact that Dolores believed in Visor greatly comforted him. But the worst part was that the imitators appeared. They acted brazenly, leaving a mess in their wake, and even Cindy lost contact with her informants. It was clear. It was time to act. That same night, Vikir set out for the Royal Memorial, the common cemetery of the Empire's heroes. Nearby was the refuge Quo Vadis, and it was there, according to his guess, that Dantalion could be hiding. Until he checks, he won't know if it's a coincidence or a pattern. And at the same time, there's a chance to find out where Cindy's informants have gone. As soon as Vikir arrived at the scene, several zombies attacked him. A great opportunity to test Anubis. A portable yet powerful weapon that, it's hard to believe, was gifted by IN. Just one arrow and 3 monsters flew to pieces. This Adonai bow was a true masterpiece. Another legendary item in the protagonist's arsenal. And then a familiar smell enveloped him. It was unmistakable. The stench of the demon. But something about him was wrong. He was weaker, more diluted, almost discolored. And the source came from the Quo Vadis shelter. Meanwhile, in the shadows, a strange girl in a mask was performing a mysterious ritual. She was clutching something in her hands, muttering about losing Rose again. The cursed Dantalion took everything from her again. But this time, she swore she would never let anyone take her loved ones away again. The girl with bright red hair looked pleased. She finally took advantage of Seer's ability to find what you want most. And Rose, whom she had been looking for so long, was now there. Unlike another person. But while it may seem to you that nothing is clear, this is the culmination of the whole story. Unexpectedly, Vikir intervened. His voice cut sharply through the silence. He demanded that no one move. He just needed answers. With each passing second, it became clear. In front of him was a creature, half demon, half human. But that other girl, as it turned out, was only Dantalion's servant. Although it would be more accurate to say, a victim of kidnapping. And most importantly, the name of the demon with whom the contract was made sounded familiar. It was Saya. The wizard drew his bow without hesitation. He intended to destroy the demon. But the stranger was not going to give up. She immediately recognized his marksmanship and asked suspiciously if he belonged to the Balak tribe. The protagonist openly admitted that he was a hunter for this tribe. In response, the girl screamed about a certain night, about revenge, and promised to kill the barbarian. But the closer Vikia got, the stronger he felt that the scent emanating from her was human. And it was at this moment that she caught him. She fired the spikes straight into his body. A victorious smile appeared on her face. True, not for long. Vikia instantly healed his wounds. And then, as if out of thin air, a huge monster grew in front of him. But even he wasn't a problem. The Baskervilles' technology easily destroyed him. The girl recognized this trick. She screamed, begging him to stop. But the forces had already converged, and in an instant, a deafening explosion covered everything. She survived, barely. Her voice was barely audible. She was begging him not to leave her. The wizard, stunned, asked what made her make a contract with a demon. But even behind every death, there is always someone's story.